Chapter 1543. Countless branches crawled along the bottom of the barrier and leaned on it. Countless branches intertwined and swept out, densely packed and crisscrossing like creepers that covered the entire wall. They actually covered the entire huge barrier that enveloped the entire void. It was as if countless palms were lifting it up. That endless power caused extremely strong vibrations to be born between heaven and earth. In the distant void, Shenghua and Muri were engaged in a fierce battle. Naturally, when they saw the scene of the divine tree supporting the sky, they couldn't help but attack more fiercely and become even more frenzied. The enchantment of evil power was a nirvana-level existence, formed by gathering the power of all evil spirits. In fact, it was stronger than ordinary nirvana-level matrices. However, Qin Hao swallowed the evil fetus, causing the peak to lose its source of evil power. The enchantment was damaged and could no longer repair itself. Every loss would weaken it. Shenghua didn't know how Qin Hao controlled the power of the wind of misfortune. When he captured the wind of misfortune and imprisoned it in the evil lair, it took a lot of effort. It was hard to imagine that a little Ren Huang could control the wind of desolation and use its power to crack the enchantment. The longevity tree was indeed the only one left in the world, but it was not very useful to Shenghua, so he had never paid attention to it. However, this was not enough to prove that the longevity tree was weak. On the contrary, it was extremely powerful. It was because the longevity tree contained the power of life, which clashed with Shenghua's evil power. He couldn't use it, so he threw it out of the divine palace and left it in the gulf of the fallen emperor as a test tool to test the strength of a warrior's bloodline. The longevity tree was originally a sacred object of the divine palace's Taiwei Peak. It could only thrive under the nourishment of the abundant spiritual energy of the divine palace. The spiritual energy of the outside world was thin, and it lacked nutrition, so it had always been in a primitive state. In other words, if it was given enough nourishment, it could grow without restraint. It was completely possible to break the enchantment, not to mention that the enchantment had been cracked by Qin Hao with the power of the wind of misfortune. One could imagine how angry Shenghua was at this moment. The evil fetus that he had refined for 10,000 years had been taken away, and Qin Hao had cut off his path to godhood. Now, he even wanted to escape. Boundless evil power erupted. Regardless of whether or not the body of the emperor could withstand it, the evil soul rippled with terrifying power of the will of the great path. One after another, deformed and ugly heads broke out from the body of the holy flower, letting out sharp and hoarse screams. They blotted out the sky and the sun, and there was no end to them. All of them madly rushed toward the figure of the disciple on the longevity tree to devour him. Seeing this, Muri let out a long cry of the divine phoenix. Unblemished flames of the way spread out from the body of the divine phoenix, forming a raging barrier of flames to block it. However, the power of Shenghua's evil soul was too strong. Even though many of the evil spirits were killed by the flames of Tao, there were still many deformed heads that flew towards Qin Hao and the others. Almost there, almost there. You guys have to work harder, Zhou Wudao urged with all his might. The incomparably huge divine tree stood at the peak of the Wei Peak. Countless raging dragon-like roots penetrated the ground and ran through the entire Wei Peak. The vast evil cavern was filled by the roots of the longevity tree. It was like an imposing giant, supporting the enchantment of evil power. Between heaven and earth, there was an invisible force trembling wildly. But everyone felt that something was missing. Although the divine tree was close to the enchantment, it did not have the strength to penetrate it. Oh no, Shenghua is driving the evil spirits to kill us. A disciple looked over with a pale face. At this time, in mid-air, one after another, long and ugly heads were shuttling back and forth, crossing the line of defense of the flames of the way of the divine phoenix, and biting towards the crown of the tree. The obsessions of the 7 palace lords of Migres were swallowed up by these ugly things. At this moment, all of them were riding on the crown of the tree, and their hearts were filled with endless fear. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. Green branches swept through the air, turning into the sharpest spikes in the world. Sensing the danger Qin Hao and the others were facing, the endless branches rushed forward and pierced through the bald heads of all the monsters, not allowing any of the evil spirits to pass through. Everyone was shocked. This tree was a bit powerful. The Nirvana-level obsessions could not resist the evil spirits, and they were easily wiped out by it. It had to be said that Qin Hao seemed to have picked up a treasure. Power, give me power. The childish voice resounded in the world, and it sounded very anxious. Then, everyone saw that the branches of the longevity tree that pierced through the heads of the evil spirits quickly withered and turned into ashes. Although it had killed countless evil spirits, half of its branches had withered. Life and death were two extremes, and their powers clashed and countered each other. Although the evil spirits could devour the will of life of living people, they could not refine the longevity tree. Similarly, the longevity tree contained the purest life force in the world, and if it was hit too fiercely by the will of destruction, it would not be able to withstand it. Whoosh! The divine tree shook, and with just one hit, its giant body began to shrink. Obviously, the soul power of the people could not support its consumption. Damn it! Shenghua's roar shook the world. If he had known this would happen, he would have thrown that rotten thing cultivated by Tai Wei into the inner sea of the southern region to feed the fish. The tree is shrinking, what should we do? Senior brothers of Tai Wei Peak, hang in there. We have no more energy. Sorry. Beams of soul power disappeared one after another. Many disciples of Tai Wei Peak were pale and covered in sweat. They were so tired that they could not squeeze out any more soul power. Currently, only Tan Gung and Northgate Schwanda had the energy to grit their teeth and hang in there. Unfortunately, no matter how hard they tried, they could not even stop the longevity tree from shrinking, let alone stabilize its size. Splat! Qin Hao cut his palm and pressed it on the trunk of the divine tree. Since he had used up all his energy, he could only use his blood to replace it. After all, his blood contained the power of the nether purifying water. His blood was absorbed by the divine tree, and its shrinking size stopped almost immediately. It began to grow again, and the branches that had been infected by the evil spirits gradually regained their vitality. If you don't want to die, do as I say. Showuk's eyes were slightly red, and there was an extremely sharp sword aura around him. It was as if he could shoot out sword will from his eyes and kill people without leaving a trace. The disciples of Tai Wei Peak, who were riding on the tree, nodded repeatedly. They all understood and followed suit. Beams of sharp blade light pierced their palms and pressed them on the trunk below them. When the blood was absorbed by the longevity tree, it grew rapidly. A huge ball of green light burst out from where Qin Hao was and extended to the entire divine tree. In an instant, the roots that reached into the ground became stronger, and there was a loud cracking sound. Under the huge rocks of the Wei Peak, tree roots kept bursting out. It was not only the Wei Peak that was cracking, but the enchantment above was also cracking. It was about to break. We're almost out, put in more effort. Even if my blood runs dry, I don't want to stay in this broken place anymore. The disciples' eyes were wide open as they screamed with all their might. Their screams were as loud as pigs being slaughtered, joining together into one sound. Boom! The tree crown supported the enchantment with evil power shook. Boom! The second sound. Boom! The third sound. It was as if a huge hammer was striking. There was a cracking sound. A sharp branch pierced out, and then countless branches frequently pierced the enchantment. The cracks continued to expand like a broken mirror. There was a loud crash, and the evil light above everyone's head completely collapsed. Between heaven and earth, countless fresh spiritual energy began to flow in. The power that was pressing on everyone's hearts completely disappeared. Run! They didn't think too much about it, and they didn't even have time to cheer. There was only one word in everyone's mind. Run, run as far as you can. They would never tell anyone that they were disciples of the divine palace. This title was a curse. Give me back the evil body. The hoarse roar shook the heavens as if it had caused countless evil spirits to howl. The disciples were liberated, but Shenghua had fallen into complete madness. The enchantment was broken. If Qin Hao escaped, it would not be so easy to take back the evil body. Boom! A great evil shadow was born behind Shenghua. It was huge, with a green face and fangs, 3 heads and 6 arms. It was extremely ferocious. It was like an evil god of calamity had descended. The terrible evil shadow stepped on the heavens. Its huge palm ignored the divine phoenix flames and knocked Muri down from the sky. It waved the other 5 arms toward the longevity tree. At this moment, it was as if countless evil spirits were born between heaven and earth. The entire void was imprisoned. The disciples who escaped were shocked to find that their bodies could not move. The rules of nirvana, the heavens were still. Dad, run. The childish voice of a child came into Qin Hao's mind, stimulating his soul. The huge longevity tree shook violently, and the crown of the tree shook. It broke Shenghua's evil power of nirvana. Everyone felt a shock coming from under their feet. It was as if the soles of their feet had been punched. One by one, they were involuntarily shaken into the sky and disappeared in the sky. Boom! The giant arm formed by the massive evil force swept out. The evil god's 5-armed shadows swept out from different directions and slammed into the trunk of the divine tree. The thick trunk was actually broken by the attack, and a loud cracking sound was heard. Under the erosion of Shenghua's evil power, the broken longevity tree shrank and withered. It turned into powder and disappeared. Hungry, I'm so hungry. The childish voice finally stopped ringing. Longevity tree. Qin Hao stretched out a hand full of cracks. It would not give up its life for the world, but it was willing to give up its longevity for him. Xiao Han hugged Qin Hao tightly and looked at the longevity tree that turned into ashes. It was all over. Never come back again. Their vision became more and more blurry. Faintly, they seemed to hear Sister Muri's words. Bang! Muri's body fell to the ground. Her soul power was exhausted, and her divine phoenix body no longer existed. Her Migres palace clothes were tattered, and blood flowed in many places. Shenghua looked up at the void. The evil light in his eyes was strong, full of anger, unwillingness, and resentment. But he was not in time to stop Qin Hao, who had taken the evil fetus, successfully escaped. Although he escaped, you will pay 100 times the price. Boom! The mighty evil shadow's foot fell, and the void trembled. It stomped down on Muri, who had lost her divine phoenix body. Muri smiled as if she did not notice. Faces appeared in her mind. Eastern Sky, Changyu Migres, her uncle masters, Shirmu, Izue Tianke, Zhan Xiong, and the other peak seat. She was supposed to be a dead person. It was a blessing from the heavens that she had lived for so long. It was no longer important how Shenghua tortured her, whether to devour her divine phoenix body or refine her emperor's will. She had no regrets in buying time for Qin Hao to leave. The giant evil shadow's foot fell, and the heavens seemed to collapse. Qin Hao had escaped. Only Muri could bear the hatred of having her body taken. But at this moment, a beam of light suddenly returned from the outside world. It was like a bolt of lightning that pierced through the void. It broke into the broken world of the divine palace. When the evil shadow's foot fell, the light swept up Muri on the ground. Bang! The evil shadow's foot fell, and the earth shook violently. Yun Yi Dao Peak exploded under this destructive power. The other 6 peaks also began to collapse, and clouds of dust rose into the sky. Who is it? Shenghua's heart was filled with shock. The person who will kill you. In the void, a figure in a purple robe stood. On his face, there was a Qilin mask. Although his back was facing Muri, this person's body flashed with extremely bright golden emperor's light. His powerful aura was no weaker than Muri's. He was like a god of war flying from the 9th heaven. Leave. A male voice came into Muri's ears. She had never heard of this tone before. Obviously, she did not know who it was. Thank you, Muri said. The remaining dilly turned his body and turned into a flash of golden brilliance that flew out of the ninth heaven. In order to stop Shenghua, she fought with her life, but it did not mean that she wanted to die in his hands. Qin Hao was the only flame left in the Migres palace. He shouldered her hope, and she also wanted to see him grow up with her own eyes. Without any superfluous words, Muri left directly. This person's cultivation was not below hers. Since he dared to break in and face the evil soul Shenghua, it proved that he had the ability to deal with it. As for gratitude, it would be done sooner or later. The huge heretic god's Dharma body stood in midair. Shenghua was inside the Dharma body. He watched Miaoli leave, but he didn't make a move to stop her. Instead, he focused all his attention on the Qilin man who had barged in. Shenghua felt a sense of danger from the other party. Okay, next, I can completely let go of my hands and feet and fight, the man in Qilin said. He looked up at the void. Qin Hao had safely left, and he was no longer afraid of exposing his identity. Chapter 1544. In the void, the two of them faced each other quietly, and the air was filled with a strong murderous aura. The noble purple robe rustled, exuding a graceful and noble aura. Under the Kylan mask, a pair of resolute eyes gave off a feeling of iron-bloodedness. If Qin Hao was here, he would definitely recognize that this person was Dan Go. Of course, he had another identity. He was one of the lords of the Thunder Pool Palace, the Thunder Emperor of the East Continent, and also the master of Lei Jiao. At this moment, there was a faint sound of thunder vibrating within the body of the Imperial Censor, and the golden-white Emperor's light that was blooming became more and more violent. His aura was rising steadily, as if there was no limit. He had suppressed his cultivation for many years. He endured in Dango, and even after he came to the southern region, he still endured. During the battle in Golden Light City, he could have easily killed Xianyuan Wuba and the others, but he was afraid that it would arouse Qin Hao's suspicion, so he tried his best to restrain himself. Otherwise, how could Xianyuan Wuyao, the third prince of the Xianyuan family, be worthy of being his opponent? The Imperial Censor felt that it was a shame to fight with Xianyuan Wuyao, as the other party was not worthy at all. Later, after the battle in Feng City ended, he boarded the ship with Duan Zhanfei and prepared to return to Beijiang together. Halfway through, he changed his mind and decided to stay and watch over Qin Hao, and Duan Zhanfei had no objection to it. In fact, for the past 3 years, the Imperial Censor had been hiding in the dark. On the day the signs were activated, he also came to the Imperial Gulf and witnessed Shenghua, disguised as the black-robed Emperor Yuan, slaughtering all the signs. At that time, he could see that there was a big conspiracy behind the Divine Palace. It was just that Qin Hao and the others were teleported away by the array. The array force was extremely strange and had the effect of hallucinating. Affected by the array force, the Imperial Censor couldn't keep up in time. Until one day, he suddenly realized that the Divine Palace was in front of him. You set up the Nirvana barrier, refined the talents of the 4 regions of the continent, and seized the bloodline of all things. I originally thought that I was cold-blooded enough, but you are even crazier than me. The Imperial Censor said coldly. The barrier of the Divine Palace was very strong, and even he wasn't confident that he could break it from the outside. Moreover, he had been hesitating to bombard the boundary. He didn't know if it would affect Qin Hao in the Divine Palace. He didn't dare to act rashly. But today, the enchantment had been broken from the inside out. At that moment, the monster trainer's reaction was not one of surprise. Instead, he immediately went into battle mode and prepared for battle. Now that Qin Hao had safely left, he had nothing to worry about. Who are you? Shenghua's scolding came from the giant evil god's shadow. He could clearly sense the other's level. It was at the peak of the unblemished plane, infinitely close to the nirvana plane. This man was not a member of the divine palace, yet he possessed such terrifying power. Even if you ask 100 more questions, the answer will still be the same. You. The imperial censor raised his hand slowly and pointed at the gigantic evil god's shadow. You must die today. This person's evil aura was too dense. It was unknown how many experts' Tao wills he had devoured, so he posed a great threat to Qin Hao. That depends on whether you have the ability to kill me. Xinghua roared. The shadow of the evil god stepped forward. As its foot landed, the space trembled violently as if it was about to collapse. A huge fist blasted forward, spewing out endless evil light, swallowing the imperial censor whole. Boom! Crack! A bolt of thunder fell from the ninth heaven, landing where the imperial censor was. The evil light disappeared under the bombardment of the thunder. An equally huge shadow descended from the sky, like the god of thunder, surrounded by lightning, exuding the might of the great path of thunder. Is that all you've got? The imperial censor sneered and punched forward. The huge shadow of the god of thunder stepped forward, and the might of the great path turned into endless lightning of doomsday. Bursts of explosive power bombarded the evil god's body. Boom, boom, boom. The evil god's shadow took a few steps back. Xinghua felt his body go numb. The terrible will of the great path of thunder penetrated his evil power and invaded his body, as if it could shatter his evil soul. Thunder arts, can you compare to the Taoist scripture? Xinghua clenched his fist in the void. Above his head, a huge thundercloud descended. Dazzling divine thunder fell madly from the thundercloud and gathered on his body. His 6 evil arms waved and swept out an endless sea of thunder to devour the imperial censor. What I know is far more than just thunder arts. The imperial censor roared, and a turbulent brilliance burst out in all directions. A terrifying fighting will filled the sky. The fighting will was so strong that it was as if a real god had possessed him. The thunder above the god of thunder's chi flashed, and a blazing divine thunder intertwined with Xinghua's evil thunder, and they attacked each other crazily. Boom! The great path was shattered, and the divine thunder was destroyed. The evil thunder continued to move forward, fierce and overbearing. Along the way, it condensed into thunder swords. Endless divine thunder swords pierced through the evil god's shadow. A mouthful of blood spilled in the air, and the battle form that enveloped Xinghua was shattered. A look of shock appeared in his eyes. Extreme fighting will. It was pure fighting will, without any rules or will. It was the most fundamental battle. It was as if this Qilin man was the incarnation of the god of war, born to fight. When the fighting will entered his body, it was not only his thunder arts that were strengthened, but also his constitution. The fighting will was inextinguishable, and his combat ability was endless. You're not weak either, but a little weaker than me. A trace of blood flowed from the corner of the imperial censor's mouth. Below his Qilin mask, a small amount of evil qi slowly seeped out. It was obvious that he had been injured by Xinghua's evil thunder, but the evil qi was immediately destroyed by the divine thunder around him. One more move and I'll grant you hatred, the imperial censor said. Platinum vigor qi raged. The sky above the divine palace was once again covered by huge dark clouds. Dazzling divine thunder flashed, and the powerful might of the way continued to strengthen in the fighting will. 9 palaces versus Dili. Xinghua clenched his fist and roared. The evil god's shadow collapsed, and it was obvious that he was at a disadvantage. But it was impossible to say that he had lost. Beams of golden light continued to penetrate his body, wrists, legs, knees, back, and heart. When the last beam of golden light reached his head, it flashed. Xinghua had actually opened up the complete power of the War Emperor. His flesh contained endless overbearing power. He clenched his fist, and a series of sonic booms were heard in the void. Countless abnormally long heads poked out from Xinghua's back, waving like countless arms. In those heads, the faces of Migres, Supreme, and Mizar Zhan Zun appeared, filled with endless evil thoughts. Xinghua awakened all evil and released the complete evil force. That powerful force began to crack the Thearcha's body little by little. Emperor Yuan's body was obviously not enough to withstand his explosive power. If it were the evil fetus, he would definitely be stronger. Tomb of the Gods. The Imperial Censor spat out a word. It was as if a divine order had descended. He pointed forward, and divine thunder struck down. With a buzz, the sky seemed to collapse. The huge dark clouds containing endless thunder tribulations pressed towards Xinghua. Even if the evil god under the heavenly Tao was still alive, it would be difficult for him to escape death. Xinghua looked up at the sky. The dark clouds were huge and boundless. Terrifying thunder tribulations flickered within them. A terrifying battle might press down. It was as if the war god of the Nine Lands was standing in the thunderclouds. At this moment, countless evil spirits behind Xinghua frantically rose into the sky, trying to stop it with evil power. Bang! 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 Ugly heads continued to explode in the thunder tribulations, including the faces of Migres and the others. The thunder clouds of the war god fell with unstoppable momentum, pressing down on Xinghua's head inch by inch. At this moment, Xinghua felt as if he was fighting against the heavenly Tao. He actually felt powerless. He raised his arms, and the battle of the 9 palaces dilly in his body erupted to the limit. His constantly changing face finally fixed on the appearance of Mizar Zhan Zun, as if he wanted to use Mizar's will to support himself. Even so, his legs still sank bit by bit, his back gradually bent, and his bones burst one after another. No. Boom! Crack! The thunder tribulations of the Tomb of the Gods engulfed the earth, completely covering the broken divine palace. An extremely unwilling roar dissipated in the thunder tribulation. I already said that you are a little weaker than me. The Imperial Censor witnessed Xinghua's fall. He could no longer feel any trace of evil power in the endless space. A smile appeared under his Kylan mask. Then, his body trembled violently, and the shadow of the thunder god in the void suddenly dissipated. A mouthful of blood sprayed on the ground, and he coughed violently. It seems that this body is still unable to support my strength. He gently rolled up his sleeves, and many cracks appeared on his sturdy arms. Some evil chi was seeping out of his skin. The Imperial Censor's expression was solemn. He turned into a stream of light and flew toward the sky. He had to quickly find a place to expel the evil power that was eroding his body. He flapped his primordial wings and flew tirelessly. Time seemed to pass very slowly in his consciousness. After an unknown period of time, just when the disciples were about to faint from exhaustion, their eyes finally lit up. It was as if they had entered another world and finally returned to reality. Pung, 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 pung. Many wet bodies fell to the ground. Every time they fell, they lay motionless in their original position. It was as if even their heartbeats had stopped. The sound of panting could be heard. At a glance, on the shore of a vast bay, the disciples who had escaped from the divine palace were sprawled haphazardly in the grass like a group of dead pigs. Qin Hao's head was resting on Xiao Han's lap. A layer of clear light flickered on his body as he gradually recovered some strength. However, he was not relaxed at the moment. In order to help them escape, the entire longevity tree had been destroyed by Xinghua. Senior Sister Muri had brought up the rear, and her fate was still unknown. How could he calm down? We finally escaped. Zhou Wudao's sobbing voice was heard. 3 years in the Divine Palace had been both a dream and a nightmare. In the past 3 years, everyone's cultivation had undergone earth-shaking changes. They had all advanced from the Yuan Venerate level to the human sovereign level. Many of them had comprehended laws, and a few had even stepped into the Emperor level. If they had been in the outside world, they might not have had such impressive achievements in 30 years, let alone 3 years. However, all of this had been a gamble with their lives. They had almost died in the hands of the evil soul, been refined into Tao intent, and lost their consciousness. Even though everyone present was a famous genius, they were still filled with fear of the divine palace. If they could do it all over again, probably no one would be willing to participate in this omen. The divine palace would become an indelible shadow in everyone's hearts, and Shenghua would definitely become a nightmare that they could not get rid of. Perhaps many people would wake up from their dreams in fright. However, in the past 3 years, they had been taught by the 7 peak venerates and taken care of by the various chief senior brothers. Even though those people were just a wisp of obsession, they were so real. Perhaps Xinghua would become a fear in the depths of their hearts, but the peak venerates and senior brothers were beautiful memories that were engraved in their memories. This is Fallen Emperor Bei. Showuk propped himself up and scanned the surroundings. He couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. The place where they were now was actually the last assessment site where they had received the omen. They had returned to square one. Hearing this, everyone crawled up and looked around. It really was the fallen Emperor Bei. Chapter 1545. Translator. Henyi Translations Editor. Henyi Translations. The Ocean Emperor welcomes the Emperor at the source of the southern region's inner sea, fallen Emperor Bei. Now, the river water flowed slowly like blood. Some broken bones floated with the wave. Occasionally, a few horrifying skulls would emerge from the water, causing one's heartstrings to tighten. This scene was no longer as peaceful and natural as it was when they first came here. Blood and evil aura were everywhere, giving them the illusion that they were still in the divine palace. A pungent smell wafted over. Everyone looked at themselves and then looked at the others. At this moment, they discovered that everyone's clothes were soaked by the river water. It was as if blood was flowing down. They couldn't help but bend over and vomit. Could it be that we returned to the outside world through the blood river? No wonder I had the illusion of drowning during the escape. Everyone recalled. They flew from the divine palace to the top of the void. Although they were extremely nervous along the way and were in a mess, everyone's senses were still there. Could it be that the divine palace is under the blood river? Or, fallen Emperor Bei was originally the divine palace back then? Showuk looked at everyone with a frown. What he said was not without reason. The source of the inner sea was most likely the old site of the divine palace. It was only because Shenghua destroyed it that it turned into a deep pit. Later, it was filled by the river water and disappeared in history. And under the riverbed was the old site of the divine palace. It was just that an evil force opened up a boundless space, just like the hidden dragon mystic realm. Yi Yao, Zheng Qinqi, and many other geniuses of the southern region sighed in their hearts. It turned out that the divine palace had always been on the other side of the inner sea. This was something that many martial artists of the southern region had never thought of. And now, the divine palace was destroyed. The sacred ground of a generation of orthodoxy had also become a forbidden land that everyone revered. No one dared to set foot in it anymore. "Big brother, we have to leave quickly." Xiaogua walked to Qin Hao's side and said. Qin Hao's gaze followed the river bend and looked at the vast and endless inner sea. Crossing the inner sea is not an easy task. The geology of this inner sea was special. Countless terrifying storms swept across the sky, and the wind was extremely strong. Even the lower-level thearchs would find it difficult to resist. Ordinary martial artists couldn't tear space to move forward, let alone fly. Moreover, they had just experienced a catastrophe. In order to escape, they had exhausted their essence, qi and soul. They didn't have the strength to move in the sky. How could they swim without a sturdy ship? That was no different from courting death. Recalling the man-eating sea beasts in the inland sea, everyone's expression changed. The ferocity of the sea demons was no less than that of Xinghua. Roar. All of a sudden, an extremely terrifying roar of a sea beast came from the front. The roar was so strong that it could shake one's mind. Everyone saw layers of giant waves that were hundreds of meters high coming from the direction of the inner sea. Behind the giant waves was a huge and terrifying beast shadow. The beast shadow was so powerful that it could overturn rivers and seas. Its aura was so strong that it was shocking. Ocean Emperor. Ning Tianxing's expression changed. His body trembled as he subconsciously took half a step back. The aura that was constantly approaching was an emperor level. The beast shadow that was pushing the giant wave was undoubtedly an emperor-level sea demon. At this moment, everyone's faces turned completely pale. Having personally experienced the catastrophe of the Divine Palace, the power of Xinghua had left an indelible shadow in their hearts. In order to break the boundary and escape, everyone was now seriously injured. Their soul power and vitality were exhausted, and they were extremely exhausted physically and mentally. How could they have any strength left to fight against the sea monsters? What's more, it was a head sea emperor. The heavens want us dead, someone cried out sorrowfully. They were not even given half a chance to live. Qin Hao stared ahead, watching the rolling giant waves approach. He felt that the aura of the Ocean Emperor behind the giant waves was somewhat familiar. At this moment, a figure flashed in his mind, and his expression relaxed. That's right, it was Jiuying, the nine-headed sea snake. Now, it had also released its cultivation and returned to the Emperor realm. Don't be nervous, it's an acquaintance, Qin Hao said softly to Shouwuk, stopping him. An acquaintance? At this moment, Shouwuk was gathering his sword momentum, wanting to perish together with the enemy. Qin Hao smiled and did not explain anything. Welcome, Master. Whoosh. The giant waves that were crazily surging forward suddenly stopped. Under the control of a tyrannical force, they automatically overflowed and turned into water vapor that filled the sky. Then, a giant monster with 9 snake heads and pitch-black scales all over its body stood in front of everyone. Its body was coiled up, and it was incomparably majestic. It was like a peak of the Divine Palace, and it was extremely shocking. But to the surprise of the disciples, the powerful Ocean Emperor actually spoke in human language. It coiled down respectfully, and its 9 proud snake heads lowered to a certain position at the same time, as if it was worshipping. Welcome, Master? Who was the Ocean Emperor's master? Everyone looked over and realized that the person who the Ocean Emperor had submitted to was Qin Hao. You're very punctual. Did you release your cultivation as soon as you sensed my appearance? Qin Hao smiled and walked forward to Jiuying. Jiuying still had all its heads lowered, and its 9 huge heads were almost stuck to the ground. It said, I planted the mark of master and servant. When Master appeared, Jiuying came forward to greet Master. But I released my cultivation half a month ago because I really couldn't suppress it. Jiuying said gloomily. Because its demonic power was too strong, it was extremely uncomfortable to hold it in its body. If it did not release it soon, it might face great trouble. It had no choice but to release it. On the day it released the seal, it was also extremely worried. After all, the fact that there was no imperial realm in the internal sea had become a curse on all sea demons. But anyone who broke through to the imperial realm would mysteriously disappear the next day. Jiuying was really scared at that time, but strangely, it was fine. Qin Hao thought for a while. Half a month ago? Wasn't it the Fire Beacon Grand Banquet organized by Xiantian Peak? The fact that there was no imperial realm in the internal sea probably had something to do with Xinghua. He wanted to cultivate the Tao of billions of living beings, and naturally would not miss any imperial realm. Half a month ago, Xinghua was also at the Fire Beacon Grand Banquet and could not leave, so Jiuying was lucky to escape. It turns out that this monster is Big Brother's mount. Yi Shuihan breathed a sigh of relief. Human, watch your words. Jiu Ying's fierce eyes looked down at Yi Shuihan as if it could see through his divine soul, and the huge emperor's shadow could suppress Yi Shuihan's mind. It was the overlord of the internal sea for generations. Although it had submitted to Qin Hao, it would not lower its dignity in front of others. Ahem, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that. Yi Shuihan smiled apologetically. He could sense that the nine-headed sea serpent's cultivation was not simple, and it was not an ordinary ocean emperor. He looked at Qin Hao and said, "Since this ocean emperor is Big Brother's subordinate, it should not be difficult for us to cross the internal sea." Yes, Senior Brother Qin, we're counting on you. I've always thought that Senior Brother Qin was mighty, and was the most powerful person in the Divine Palace. Now it proves that my feeling was right. You've subdued an ocean emperor before entering the Divine Palace. Such ability is much more outstanding than someone else. Many of the people present had become flatterers, but they had forgotten that they were also top figures. In the past, it was others who had flattered them. Ning Tianxing's face was not very good. These guys were obviously hinting at him. Jiu Ying's huge snake body twisted. Hearing others call it a mount, its 9 heads were obviously suppressing a burst of anger, but these people did not seem to be wrong. Everyone, Jiu Ying has indeed signed a master-servant contract with me, but it does not mean that it does not have the dignity of an emperor. In my eyes, its position is not a mount. I hope that my fellow disciples will not talk too much about this matter. Qin Hao coughed softly. Yes, we were rude. Senior Jiuing, please forgive us. Many disciples bowed and apologized. They had to rely on the serpent to help them cross the internal sea later, and they really should not have angered it. Moreover, it was a great emperor and should be respected. Master, shall we set off immediately? Jiu Ying's expression eased a little as it asked Qin Hao. Its cultivation had been unsealed, and it was already a 2-star great emperor. Its strength was not the strongest among the thousands of demons in the internal sea, but there were definitely not many who could be stronger than it. There was always a hidden danger if it stayed in the internal sea. If it had not been waiting for Qin Hao, it might have run away long ago. Now, it wanted to leave as soon as possible. At this moment, the eyes of all the disciples present were fixed on Qin Hao's face. Under the Blood River, they did not know how Muri and Xinghua were fighting. If Muri was defeated, Xinghua could catch up with them at any time. Perhaps he would suddenly appear in the next second. Now, everyone's lives were in Qin Hao's hands. Only when he gave the order could they use Jiu Ying's power to return to their families. Chapter 1546. Next, any choice that Qin Hao made would affect the fate of everyone. Everyone looked at him, but Qin Hao did not respond. His eyes fell on the surface of the Blood River, as if he could penetrate the endless blood and look at the bottom of the riverbed, and then a strong worry appeared. Silence spoke louder than words, and Xiao Han knew what he was thinking. He was waiting for Muri. I don't know how to persuade you. Senior sister risked her life to stop the evil soul and buy time for us to escape from the Divine Palace. She must be determined to die, and all this is to protect the orthodoxy of the Migres Palace on you. We don't know the result of their fierce battle. Now, every second we stay, the danger is closer. It's good if senior sister wins, but if she loses... Xiao Han did not continue. The seriousness of failure was very clear in everyone's heart, and Qin Hao naturally also understood. Muri originally had the opportunity to leave the Divine Palace, but she endured for hundreds of years and had not left. The reason was very simple: to kill Xinghua. Now she gave the chance of survival to Qin Hao. If she lost, and Xinghua chased out of the Divine Palace, then Muri's sacrifice would be equivalent to being in vain. Big Brother, I'm not discouraging you. We have all seen how tyrannical the evil soul is. Even if senior sister wants to escape, I'm afraid the chances are very slim. Xiaogua whispered. After entering the great emperor realm, The spiritual power of warriors was extremely strong. In the face of an enemy of the same level, it was not difficult to escape if you could not win. But in front of Xinghua, it was not so easy. It could even be said that there was no possibility of survival. When they broke the enchantment, they could see the direction of the battle clearly. Muri was at a disadvantage, and it was almost impossible for her to escape from the evil soul after being injured. Qin Hao, I'm not afraid of death. If Xinghua really comes, the first person he will look for will be you. Think carefully, Zhou Wudao said. If the evil soul came, no one here would be spared, but Qin Hao would definitely be the first to be killed, in front of everyone, because he had taken the evil body of the other. Phew! Qin Hao exhaled and slowly looked away from the river. Xinghua's strength was too strong, far beyond what they could contend with at present. But to give up on Muri and leave alone was a bit heartless. However, senior sister did have the awareness and determination to die in the battle with Xinghua. She didn't even think about leaving. Qin Hao could also see this. As Xiao Han said, if Xinghua had a chance to catch up to them because of a moment of hesitation, Muri's sacrifice would have been in vain. Let's go. Qin Hao walked towards the nine-headed snakelet. The nine-headed snakelet's head was bent and its central brain was prostrated on the ground, as though it was welcoming the great king in its heart. Qin Hao grabbed Xiao Han's hand and stepped on top of Zhu Ying's head. The rest of the people climbed onto the snake's broad back. They did not dare to step on the ocean monarch's head. Roar! With a roar, the nine-headed snakelet turned around and prepared to leave. However, at this moment, there was a sudden surge of water from the bottom of the blood river. Splashes of water spread out as if there was an extremely powerful aura madly approaching. The nine-headed snakelet immediately became extremely uneasy. The power that was constantly approaching was extremely powerful, causing the depths of its soul to tremble. The river water surged wildly and countless huge bubbles appeared. Waves of blood-like waves sprayed into the air. The vast fallen Emperor Bei was trembling. What's going on? Everyone's expression changed drastically. Countless gazes looked down as if a monster would suddenly emerge from the surging river water. Roar! The nine-headed snakelet became even more agitated. As the powerful aura approached, it even lost the courage to leave. The space became extremely silent. On the huge snake's body, the bodies of the disciples began to tremble. They stared unblinkingly at the river water, their eyes filled with fear. Who was this aura that was crazily approaching them? Xinghua? Or Muri? In comparison, the possibility of Xinghua catching up was higher. The space became somewhat suffocating. The evil shadow appeared in everyone's hearts again. Many people looked desperate. Boom! Torrents of blood flew up. A body wrapped in Emperor's light flew up from below. At that moment, it was as if the will of heaven and earth had been replaced by this body. The powerful force swept across. The nine-headed snakelet's huge snake body was as weak as a baby. It was pushed back crazily, and almost fell into the river water. Looking at the majestic Emperor's body in midair, the Ocean Emperor who dominated the internal sea actually trembled crazily. Fortunately, she was not Xinghua. Senior sister. Qin Hao was pleasantly surprised. In midair, Muri was wearing a tattered Migres palace uniform. Although she was covered in wounds, she had finally returned safely. Let's go. Let's leave first. Muri's aura fluctuated violently. She could no longer maintain it. She weakly stepped on the nine-headed snakelet's head. As she landed, her body swayed. Qin Hao reacted quickly and supported her in time. Roar! Without Qin Hao's urging, the moment Muri dissipated her emperor's will, the nine-headed snakelet was released. It immediately swam wildly toward the internal sea. The strength of this human woman was something it had never seen before. She was like a goddess who suppressed all living things. Now, even the goddess was injured to this extent. One could only imagine what kind of terrifying existence was hiding in the blood river of Emperor Bei. Chapter 1547. In the vast inland sea, it was boundless. In the turbid waters, a giant nine-headed snake swam recklessly towards the southern region. Among the 9 heads, the 9-headed snakelet was in the middle. The other 8 heads stretched forward rhythmically. They were like 8 stallions, dragging their snake-like bodies that were densely covered in black scales. The journey was very peaceful. The 9-headed snakelet did not dare to make any noise to avoid disturbing Muri's cultivation. But just the demonic emperor aura that it emitted was enough to make many sea demons in the inland sea flee. At this moment, the 9-headed snakelet's broad back was filled with figures. At a glance, there were more than 300 people. Of course, these 300 people were not all of those who had escaped from the divine palace, but they made up at least 2/3 of the disciples. As for the others, their whereabouts were unknown. Qin Hao did not find any member of the Xianyuan family among the 300 people. Chang Helou was not among them either. The divine palace had been destroyed and the nightmare had ended. Since they had escaped, even if they were not far from Qin Hao, they would have tried their best to get out of Qin Hao's range of perception. The moment they stepped out of the celestial palace, the two sides were mortal enemies. With the forces gathered around Qin Hao, it would be a piece of cake for him to eliminate Chang Helou and the Xianyuan family. How would they dare to show themselves? However, the outcome would be the same sooner or later. The Xianyuan family would be completely wiped out from the southern region. At this moment, a figure in a blue robe stood. Yi Xuehan looked at the vast sea. He extended his human emperor's soul consciousness into the distance as though he was searching for something in the inland sea, but he found nothing. He could not help but look at Qin Hao, who was on the 9-headed snakelet's head, with envy in his eyes. He sighed slightly and said, "Forget it. How can all the experts who have subdued the Ocean Emperor be like boss?" Yi Xuehan was the overlord of the East Sea region, the Faith Arch. However, in the North Sea region there was also a powerful sea dragon beast. Back then, when Yi Xuehan and company arrived on a ship, the ship was sunk by the sea dragon beast. Many Shiliang warriors died in battle. Finally, Yi Xuehan lured the sea dragon beast away, allowing Qin Yun and company to luckily escape death. To this day, Yi Xuehan was still thinking about the golden sea dragon beast. Although its cultivation level was not as high as Jiu Ying's, it was still extremely ferocious. If it could submit to him like Jiu Ying, it would be wonderful. Unfortunately, Yi Xuehan did not have enough strength to gain the sea dragon's approval. "Senior sister, are you feeling better?" Qin Hao moved closer to Muri and looked at her with concern. 10 days had passed since the battle with Xinghua. It wouldn't be long before they could return to the shores of the southern continent. Over the past few days, Qin Hao had been using the tranquil water to treat Muri's injuries. Currently, Muri's external injuries had all healed. However, the internal injuries she had suffered, especially from the corrosion of the laws from the evil soul emperor's will, were not something that Qin Hao could suppress. "I'm basically fine now." Muri opened her eyes slightly. In her clear eyes, there was still some fatigue from the battle. In that battle, she had really gambled with her life. The evil soul gathered the spirits of all evil to refine numerous types of laws, and the offensive might of every single law and Tao insight was extremely formidable. If it wasn't for you forcing out the evil energy within my body, it would probably require at least 100 years to completely disperse his Tao insight attack. Muri looked at Qin Hao and said. Her expression was complicated. It was hard to imagine that this little junior brother of Migre's palace had actually swallowed the evil soul's ultimate god evil body that had been refined for 10,000 years. Not only had he swallowed it, but he had also completely refined it and merged it into his body. Qin Hao's body contained an extremely strong evil power. The ability that Xinghua displayed would appear in Qin Hao's body sooner or later. Although he could not control it now, it was easy for him to draw the evil power out of Muri's body. If not for this, not to mention a mere 10 days. Even after 100 years, Muri might not be able to get better. That's good. Qin Hao smiled in relief. The matter of devouring the evil body was not his original intention at that time. He only wanted to take back the wind form of the wind, who knew that the essence blood of the gods and devils would actually suck the evil fetus into his body. He was completely helpless. However, looking at the current situation, it was not a bad thing. On the contrary, the evil power in his body gave Qin Hao the opportunity to find the evil soul's weakness. The evil soul was too strong. It was undying and indestructible. It was not an exaggeration to call it a demigod. If he did not take the evil fetus, Qin Hao really could not find a way to defeat it. But you must be very careful in the future. The evil soul lost the evil body and will definitely run all over the continent to find you. Muri warned. If he did not take back the evil body, the evil soul would definitely not give up. Qin Hao nodded solemnly. He was being pestered. He asked, "By the way, senior sister, that battle, how did you come out?" Qin Hao naturally asked about the result of the battle between Muri and Shenghua, but he did not use the word escape to describe Muri. Senior sister was the only remaining orthodox preacher of the divine palace. She had a sacred belief that could not be blasphemed. What's more, senior brother Eastern Sky had also said that senior sister's talent was not below his. An outstanding woman like senior sister must have extremely high self-esteem. It's strange. Logically speaking, I should be far from being Shenghua's opponent. But when we fought, I found that his cultivation had not reached the nirvana realm. He was far from Master Migres. At most, he was at the peak of the unblemished realm. That's why I was able to delay him for so long. Muri also showed a puzzled expression. Back then, Muri challenged Eastern Sky as the peak seat of Daozong Peak. Eastern Sky was not there, and Migres Peak only had Muri. She had no reason to avoid fighting for the peak of Daozong Peak. Eastern Sky's obsession should have mentioned it to you, right? I was not in a good state at that time. There was karma in my heart, so I could not break through to the Emperor realm. Qin Hao nodded and listened carefully. I won't say much about the fight. In short, Shi Mu did block the Emperor's tribulation for me. But if a warrior does not accept the baptism of the Emperor's tribulation, even if his cultivation reaches the Emperor realm, he can't refine his Emperor realm body and become a real emperor. Qin Hao was someone who had been through this before, so he understood. Only by experiencing the power of the Emperor's tribulation could one completely step into the Emperor realm. In order to protect Muri's life, Shi Mu bore the Emperor's tribulation for her. But at the same time, he also deprived her of the opportunity to enter the Emperor realm. At that moment I entered a very strange state. It was as if my spiritual soul had left my body and floated into the void, merging with the great path. As for what happened outside, I had no idea. My consciousness was completely integrated with some kind of will, and I fell into a state of enlightenment. But I knew that it was not a real spiritual soul leaving the body, but a kind of martial will leaving the body. It may be difficult to understand. Have you heard of the primordial soul leaving the body? Muri asked. Primordial soul leaving the body? Qin Hao and Xiao Han looked at each other. The two nodded, but then shook their heads. When a warrior becomes a venerable, he gathers his spiritual soul. But what was the primordial soul? The primordial soul is the will power of a divine-level expert. I don't know the specific use and power. Back then, Master occasionally mentioned it, but I didn't pay attention. When I was fighting with Shi Mu, I accidentally summoned the Emperor's tribulation. Unfortunately, I couldn't be baptized by the Emperor's tribulation. The situation is similar to the primordial soul leaving the body. It is a kind of will power that transcends the body, not the spiritual soul. The spiritual soul is still in the body. Because of this, I stayed in the divine palace for many years, but the evil soul still couldn't sense my existence. Muri's tone was a little proud, but there was great sadness in her eyes. When the primordial soul left the body and merged with the will of the Great Path, she had no idea what happened outside. It was probably at that moment that the evil soul broke out from Uni Peak and washed the divine palace with blood. The people of the eastern sky were all killed. When Muri regained consciousness, she found that she had stepped into the martial emperor realm, and her vitality had turned platinum. But she didn't know that the divine palace in front of her had been destroyed long ago, and that the people of the eastern sky had been dead for a long time. She ran excitedly in front of Tian Quan, gesticulating like a silly girl, and told her enlightenment, wanting to share the surprise with her master. However, the reality in front of her was too cruel. Her master couldn't see her. Everyone in the divine palace completely ignored Muri. At that moment, she became the dead person in everyone's mouth. Chapter 1548. Muri had always existed in the form of an astral projection. During this period, she did not have any soul power fluctuations, nor did she have any aura. She was completely a body of will, detached from the physical body, and witnessed everything in the divine palace. She saw Migres often wallowing in grief alone. She saw Dong Tian carefully taking care of her attic. She also saw Chang Yu holding a 5-colored emperor's net immortal grass in a daze all day long. She also saw Shi Mu falling into deep self-blame because of guilt. She could only watch helplessly, unable to appease anyone. This kind of pain and torture could not be understood by others. Over time, she got used to it. Following this, Miaoli would no longer grieve for those obsessions. She had already become numb. She was lucky enough to find her body and hid it away. She used the primordial spirit state to cultivate with all her might. There was only one thought left in her heart, and that was revenge. She knew very well that the person who died was not herself, but the divine palace was destroyed. She vowed to catch the mastermind behind the scenes and destroy it at all costs. New disciples continued to pour into the divine palace. Many of them were very talented, not inferior to her and Eastern Sky. Unfortunately, they died in the blood cave of Uni Peak Midway, and their souls and will were refined by the evil soul. Muri found out that the murderer was Xinghua. Sadly, Xinghua's cultivation was too strong, and Muri was no match for him. She could only continue to endure. She tried to improve herself and often went to the peaks to listen to their teachings. Although the peak masters left behind their obsessions, their understanding and comprehension of martial arts were still at the nirvana level. Until Qin Hao's batch of disciples came in, Muri did not feel anything at that time. She thought that they would also become nourishment for the evil soul. However, she never expected that someone in this batch of disciples would be able to see her. Speaking of which, I was really shocked by you. At that moment, I was very nervous, afraid that your attention would lead to an anomaly. Muri looked at Qin Hao and said. Qin Hao lowered his head and smiled. This was why senior sister avoided him. Even so, I still didn't have any thoughts about you. You were too weak. Instead of wasting time on you, it was better to let you fend for yourself, and I wholeheartedly improved my cultivation and fought with Xinghua. Maybe I was lonely for too long and wanted to find someone to talk to, so I entered the illusory palace through the trial array. Muri saved Qin Hao in the illusory palace once. It was also at that time that she found that Qin Hao was indeed different. Not only could he see the essence of all things, but through Qin Hao's body, she could also release her cultivation to the outside world and use it on the creatures of the illusory palace. This made her change her mind. She thought that perhaps Qin Hao's potential was stronger than hers. In addition, Eastern Sky's obsession was especially attentive to Qin Hao, which had never happened to the previous batch of disciples. Although some disciples of the previous batches had entered the Migres Palace, Eastern Sky and Chang Yu's obsession was not too strong. On the contrary, when facing Qin Hao, Eastern Sky seemed to have come back to life. His obsession was no longer cold, and he used all kinds of methods to train and teach Qin Hao. Perhaps this is your fate with Eastern Sky, or he saw his own shadow in you, which affected his obsession. I decided that no matter what, I would send you away from this disaster. Muri said. After saving Qin Hao in the illusory palace, she made up her mind. Even though her cultivation had reached the unblemished great emperor, she was still not sure that she could fight against Shenghua. However, she was willing to gamble with her life. If she died, there would be another disciple of the Migres Palace who was better than her in the world to pass on the orthodoxy of the divine palace. Speaking of this, Qin Hao and Xiao Han's eyes reddened. Eastern Sky was really good to them. He was like an elder brother and cared for them in every way. After Daozong Peak suppressed Shermu, they directly allowed Xiao Han to cultivate in the Migres Palace. Xiao Han's ability to step into the Emperor realm in the illusory palace had a lot to do with Eastern Sky's training. Don't be sad. I know that Eastern Sky's obsession dissipated without a trace of regret. His spirit lives on in you. Muri comforted. So after the trial in the illusory palace, Senior Sister's primordial spirit returned to your body? Qin Hao's voice was a little choked. Muri nodded. Yes, the evil soul can't detect the power of my will, and I have been cleansed by the Emperor's tribulation. I am a real unblemished great Emperor. Only when my primordial spirit returns can my cultivation be released. It took a long time for the primordial spirit to return to the body and merge with it. Moreover, Muri was inexperienced and had been in an out-of-body state for many years. When she tried to complete that step, she found that it was still too late. She couldn't see the obsession of the Migres Palace for the last time. Qin Hao and the others had experienced everything that happened next. How is the evil soul now? Qin Hao clenched his fist and asked. Muri shook her head. I don't know. I am no match for him. I was defeated as soon as Uncle Master Tai Wei's longevity tree sent you away. It was only because a stranger suddenly broke in and stopped Shenghua that I had a chance to escape. A stranger? Qin Hao was surprised. What stranger? His cultivation was so powerful that he could stop Shenghua? Moreover, why didn't they see this stranger when they left? It has been 1,700 years since I started cultivating in the Divine Palace. Obviously, that person didn't come for me. Muri's tone was very certain. The appearance of that person must have a deep relationship with someone in Qin Hao's batch of disciples. Moreover, this person's cultivation was very high. It was not inferior to Muri's. At that time she was surprised. When did an expert above the flawless Emperor realm appear in the outside world? It was unimaginable in the past. He is so strong? Qin Hao was shocked. Such a cultivation was not weaker than his in his previous life. Senior Sister, did you see what he looked like? No. Muri frowned and thought carefully. But he was a man. He was wearing a purple robe. The Emperor's will was very special. He had the majesty of a king. Because his back was to me, I didn't have the chance to see his appearance. A purple robe with the majesty of a king. Qin Hao muttered to himself, trying to search for the figure of the purple robe in his memory. But when he added up the memories of his 2 lives, there was no one who fit the description. There were many people who wore purple robes. After his rebirth, Chen Wanqin's father, Chen Kang, the palace master of the Fengli Temple of the Jiang Kingdom, liked to wear purple robes. But he was not an emperor at all. How could he have the majesty of a king? In addition, the Elixir Pavilion's censor was also wearing a purple robe. This person rarely showed himself, and he seemed to be wrapped in a layer of mystery. Qin Hao couldn't see through him, but he faintly felt a sense of familiarity from him. But he was not an emperor. Hey, senior brothers and junior brothers, which family's great ancestor likes to wear purple robes? His cultivation is the 3rd realm of the emperor's path, the flawless Emperor realm. Qin Hao stood up and shouted at the people on the snake's back. He did not know this purple-robed man, so he was most likely related to someone else. It seemed that he was riding on someone else's coattails. My father likes to wear purple robes, but he is not the flawless emperor. My family's great ancestor also wears purple robes. He is old, but he especially likes to disguise himself as a young man and show off everywhere. But his cultivation is not up to senior brother Qin's standards. I used to wear purple robes too. Everyone spoke at once. The habits of 8 generations of their ancestors were thrown out from their ancestral grave. Not only did they wear purple robes, but some people also wore purple underpants. But it was not important to this matter. Okay, that's enough. Qin Hao waved his hand with a headache. It seemed that there was no hope of finding this purple-robed cultivator. At this time, Lei Jiao, who was in the crowd, wanted to say something but stopped. His master, the Thunder Emperor of the East Continent, also wore purple robes, but his cultivation had not reached the flawless realm. Thinking of this, Lei Jiao swallowed his words. Chapter 1549. Qin Hao looked at Muri and shrugged helplessly. He didn't see his face, just his purple robe. Searching for clues was like looking for a needle in a haystack. Muri said calmly, "It doesn't matter. If we meet again, I can recognize him." Flawless, the great emperor's aura was particularly special, and there should be very few people in the outside world who had such profound cultivation. If senior sister can recognize him, I will thank him, Qin Hao said. Without this purple-robed Flawless, the great emperor, Muri's life would be in danger, and his senior sister would be able to return safely. How could this help be repaid with just a big reward? He may not appreciate it, Muri said bluntly. Qin Hao froze in place, speechless. Senior sister, is there something on your mind? Xiao Han put a cloak on Muri's shoulder and saw that she seemed to have doubts. Muri took Xiao Han's hand and let her sit beside her. She took a deep breath and said, "I suspect that Shenghua is not the original body of the evil soul. It may be a doppelganger." When the divine palace was destroyed and the 7 peak masters died, her primordial spirit left her body and merged with the great path. Although she didn't witness the tragic battle, the cultivation that Shenghua displayed 10 days ago was not enough to pose a threat to Migrez. Shenghua couldn't even shake any of the 7 peaks of the divine palace. But the fact was that the 7 peaks were all destroyed, and the disciples of the divine palace were all wiped out. It can't be. Zhou Wudao's hair stood on end, and a cold feeling soaked his whole body. Not only Zhou Wudao, but on the broad snake back of the 9-headed fierce beast, all the disciples' faces were full of panic and shock. If Muri's guess was true, it was too terrible. Shenghua alone had made everyone fall into despair. Was it really just a doppelganger? Qin Hao's heart trembled slightly, and his expression was extremely solemn. Senior sister's guess was not groundless. If Shenghua only had the ability of the flawless realm, how could he kill the 7 peak masters of Migrez, as well as the chief disciples and elders of the divine palace? Perhaps my guess wasn't accurate. The evil soul refinement myriad spirit Tao insight might have a flaw in his cultivation that caused his cultivation to degenerate. Muri said again. Even a true god would not be able to fully comprehend the will of Tao that had devoured billions of lives. Shenghua's extreme cultivation path of annihilation had never appeared before, so no one was sure if his method of using the evil spirit force was correct or not. Perhaps, Qin Hao said, unable to completely fuse the Daos of billions of living beings? Impossible. The evil wind was one of the 9 elements of the desolate era. It was extremely mysterious. The evil soul used the evil wind to crush all living beings and then fuse them together at the root. His method of devouring could not be wrong. In comparison, Qin Hao believed that it was more likely to be a clone. It was just that this result was a little hard to accept. In short, when you return to the mortal world this time, it's best not to mention what happened in the divine palace to anyone. Unless it's a matter of life and death, try not to use the divine palace emperor's technique. Muri's dignified gaze swept over the disciples. The disciples shuddered at the same time and respectfully replied, "We will follow senior sister's orders." This was not a restriction, but Muri was sincerely doing it for their own good. If Shenghua had another evil soul, once their identities were exposed, they would definitely die without a burial place, and many people who escaped would be implicated. Muri could not care about other people's lives, but she had to be careful about Qin Hao's safety. He was her only junior brother of the Dao Peak. In order to fulfill Eastern Sky's last wish and protect Qin Hao's growth, she would not allow anyone to threaten Qin Hao's safety. The disciples also had no objections. It was a matter of life and death. Who would not cherish their own life? As for how to explain it to their families, they could just casually find a reason. They had only been in the divine palace for 3 years. If they came out after 3 years of cultivation, even if they told their elders, the upper echelons of their families would not believe them. They could just say that they had lost their way during the voyage. "Senior sister, what are your plans next?" Qin Hao asked. "I will watch over you first. When you step into the great emperor realm, I will return to the family to meet the descendant. I will also make a trip to Qilin Taoist Mountain and do what I can for Eastern Sky." Muri replied. Her master was no longer here, and as the eldest sister, she was like a mother. Of course, she had the responsibility to watch over her. Qin Hao was speechless. "Do you have any objections?" Muri said in a low voice. "No. You are indeed my senior sister." Qin Hao shrunk his neck. Even his tone was the same as his 2 senior brothers. They were indeed close. "Senior sister, your hair." Xiao Han's hand stroked Muri's hair on her shoulder. He looked at the hair that was gradually turning white in his palm. Moreover, at some point, there were traces of wind and frost on her face. There were many wrinkles at the corners of her eyes. She was aging step by step. "It's just the end of the lifespan. This will happen. Don't be nervous." Muri smiled casually. Qin Hao lowered his head and didn't say anything else. His senior sister entered the divine palace before the age of 30. Even though she kept her primordial spirit in an out-of-body state, her actual lifespan was already 1,700 years old. She had indeed reached the limit of the unblemished Great Emperor realm. If she couldn't step into the Nirvana realm soon, she would pass away soon. This was something that even pills couldn't save her. "Senior sister, I will listen to you in the future." Qin Hao lowered his head and said. Muri smiled slightly. She slowly raised her gaze and looked at the endless void. God realm could transcend reincarnation. The divine palace was the holy land of the mortal world that gave birth to God. However, after the martial monarch realm ancestor, there was no more God realm ascension. The peak venerables of each generation had the supreme belief of becoming a god. It was probably because of this that a monster like Shenghua was born from the fusion of countless peak venerables' evil souls. Another 5 days passed. Everyone finally stepped onto the land of the southern region and entered the territory of the proud northern divine nation. The 9-headed snakelet's speed wasn't slow. And at this moment, at a port in the northernmost part of proud northern god nation, there were countless soldiers of Li family gathered. Their bearing was solemn, just like statues standing on both sides of the port, silently watching the huge crowd that had just stepped onto the port. This group of people, the average age was not old, but each of them had an extraordinary temperament. Each of them was extremely outstanding and belonged to the type that was hard to forget after a glance. This group of people was the disciples of the divine palace led by Qin Hao. "Everyone, since you have come to my Li family's territory, why don't you let Yaki do his duty as a host and follow me to the imperial capital? My father will be very happy to see everyone." The seventh prince of the proud northern divine nation, Liyaki, faced the disciples of the divine palace and invited them warmly. He once had an unforgettable grudge with Qin Hao, but that was all in the past. After experiencing the catastrophe of the divine palace, it was not worth mentioning in comparison. And this group of disciples of the divine palace in front of him, any one of them was a proud genius from all over the continent. Not only were they talented, but most of them were direct disciples of princes and emperors. It might not be so obvious when they were in the divine palace, but once they returned to the outside world, this network was very strong. Liyaki certainly hoped to firmly stabilize this relationship. Junior brotherly, cough cough. One of them opened his mouth and noticed Muri's sharp eyes looking at him. His tone suddenly changed and he corrected himself. Your Highness Yaki doesn't need to be so polite. After 3 years of wandering, we are very homesick. There will be plenty of time to visit in the future. This, all right. Liyaki could understand. After which, he glanced at Qin Hao as a look of struggle flickered in his eyes. But very quickly, he felt relieved in his heart. Thanks to Brother Qin for saving my life, all grudges of the past shall be written off. If there's anything you need, just say the word. My Li clan will definitely be there. Liyaki was very clear about the bad relationship between Qin Hao and the Xianyuan clan of the proud southern divine nation. This time, he came back alive. With Muri, the flawless great emperor, by his side, the Xianyuan clan would suffer. Their Li family of the proud northern divine nation had always been at odds with the proud southern divine nation. They had always wanted to annex them. It was better to take this opportunity to join forces and remove the Xianyuan clan from the southern divine nation. Qin Hao could hear the hidden meaning in Liyaki's words. In the past, the Li family would never easily join forces with him, but now that his senior sister was here, the fate of the Xianyuan clan was set. Liyaki wanted a share of the pie. However, it didn't matter. One more friend meant one more path. Your Highness is too kind. I won't be polite, Qin Hao said with a smile. Chapter 1550. The two nodded tacitly, understanding each other's thoughts. Unknowingly, the two sides had reached an agreement to conquer the Xianyuan clan. The storm was coming, and the situation in the southern region was about to change dramatically. Many peerless geniuses from the East continent were confused. The two seemed to be hiding something. Could it be that Qin Hao had encountered some obstacles? A genius from the East continent stepped forward and said, Brother Qin, if you have any difficulties, you can tell us. We are willing to do our best. Yes, we are willing to do our best for Brother Qin. We are friends. Brother Qin's business is everyone's business. Don't you think so? Yes. Everyone gradually realized that they were all willing to contribute their strength. Liyaki looked at this group of people strangely. They were all so proactive. They were about to start a war with the imperial family. Many people would die. Why were these guys joining in the fun? When he noticed Muri behind Qin Hao, Liyaki's face trembled slightly. He suddenly felt that these guys were very smart. Muri's current status was equivalent to the living lord of the divine palace. Everyone was in awe of her. Moreover, her strength was extremely strong. How many unblemished emperors could there be in the outside world? As long as they could have a relationship with Muri, if the major families were in trouble in the future, this preacher of the divine palace would not stand idly by. Smart. They were all too smart. Besides, Qin Hao had saved their lives. He had to pay back what he owed. I really need your help. Follow the coast of the northern Ao kingdom all the way south. In a few days we will reach Brother Zheng's territory. Why don't you come with me? I believe the elders of the Zheng clan will be very happy. Qin Hao smiled cheekily. More than 300 elites of the divine palace stood out from tens of millions of candidates. They had survived until the end and were taught by the 7 peak masters. This was an extremely terrifying combat force. Under the imperial realm, these 300 people were invincible. They were just enough to restrain the Renhuang power of the Xianyuan clan. I have the same idea. I have long wanted to go to Brother Zheng's house. Brother Zheng, you must treat us well and take us to see the beautiful scenery of the Zheng dynasty. Everyone rushed towards Zheng Qinqi. Looking at their excited and joyful expressions, they were simply like Zheng Qinqi's life and death brothers. Of course, Zheng Qinqi blushed with shame. He raised his head to look at Qin Hao. This level of influence was indeed worthy of being the first seat of the Migres Hall. Sigh, I can't compare myself to others. Li Yaqi flicked his sleeve coldly. In fact, he really wanted to spit at this group of disciples of the Divine Palace. He had sincerely sent out an invitation. Not only did no one respond, but they were also looking for excuses to avoid him. Qin Hao gestured slightly, and as a result, everyone scrambled to go over. Brother Ning, what do you think? Qin Hao looked at Ning Tianqing again. He used to address him as Brother Tianqing. However, after the incident at the Divine Palace, Ning Tianqing left a bad impression on him, and their relationship slowly drifted apart. However, now that they had returned to the outside world, the Zheng dynasty and Martial Tranquility Nation still had an alliance. When one side took action, the other side naturally had to respond. Of course, with Qin Hao's current strength, he didn't need Ning Wu's cooperation at all, so he just asked out of courtesy. I need to report to the Great Ancestor. There shouldn't be a problem. Ning Tianqing replied. He had ascended to the position of Crown Prince and controlled the Martial Tranquility Nation, but this was no small matter. Once the war began, there was no turning back. This war would be very fierce, and the Xianyuan family was not to be trifled with. He had to consider the Martial Tranquility Nation. Okay. Qin Hao nodded. It was meaningless for the Martial Tranquility faction to not send troops. He looked at Li Yaqi and said, Your Highness, please send a void warship. Lei Jiao, Qian Ning, Feng Qianli, Hai Sha, and everyone else, come with me. Lei Jiao's face darkened. Why did he feel like he had boarded a pirate ship? He hadn't agreed yet. Buzz. The void warship slowly rose into the air, and a stream of light flew thousands of feet away, gradually disappearing in the direction of the Zheng dynasty. The Xianyuan family is completely finished. Li Yaqi sighed as he watched the stream of light fly away. Even the Daluo immortals couldn't save him. The Xianyuan clan had dominated the southern region for thousands of years. The Xianyuan clan was an equal to the Li clan. Another few days passed. The southern region was like spring all year round, and the scenery was pleasant. Because of the geographical advantage, the people living here were very comfortable. At this time, in the vast land between the southern proud empire and the former prosper nation, several mountains rose from the ground. Looking from the endless plains, it was very majestic and gave people a sense of majesty. This was the holy land of the Music Palace, a first-rate sect in the southern region. On the peaks of several mountains, glorious palaces stood. In mid-air, many floating islands were arranged, setting off the main peak as beautiful as a fairyland. A soothing melody drifted between heaven and earth, causing those who listened to it to become intoxicated and forget to return. The Music Palace's musical skills were the best in the southern region, attracting countless musicians to seek the Tao. Since ancient times, the sect had nurtured the most outstanding musical talents. However, compared to the past, the music coming from the various peaks of the Music Palace added a sense of celebration. At this time, there were countless busy figures moving up and down the Music Palace. Many outstanding talents of the southern region, as well as famous experts, had arrived. They had come to celebrate. Today was the 600th birthday of the Music Palace's Supreme Elder. It was said that after the birthday, the Supreme Elder of the Music Palace would attempt to break through to the Emperor realm in front of all the guests. Birthday, breakthrough, double happiness. Chapter 1551. The main peak of Music Palace was surrounded by white clouds. Above the clouds, one could vaguely see a dazzling immortal palace. It was as dazzling as an immortal palace, giving people the feeling of a pilgrimage. A melodious tune came from the immortal palace. It was vigorous and majestic. At the foot of the mountain, a straight jade staircase extended up into the clouds and connected to the immortal palace. On both sides of the jade staircase, countless Music Palace disciples stood respectfully. Their clothes were neat and tidy, and their postures were straight. They had set up a ceremony to welcome the powerful seniors who had come from all over the southern region. These seniors had all come to celebrate the patriarch's birthday. One figure after another walked up the jade staircase. No one was flying, and they were all walking. They carried heavy gifts in their hands, and their faces were full of smiles. At a glance, there were thousands of people who had arrived at the Immortal Palace's square. It was enough to show how famous the Music Palace's Grand Elder was, and there was still an endless stream of people coming to celebrate. The birthday banquet was held at the Immortal Palace's square. Because there were so many people, the Immortal Palace could not accommodate them. In the incomparably wide square, there were slender long tables. Under the tables, there was a luxurious blanket for guests to sit. The long tables were densely packed. The front and back, the left and right were all very orderly. There was no room for error. At this moment, many guests were seated. The guests looked at the Immortal Palace. In front of the Immortal Palace, there was a long dragon table made of gold. The table was completely filled with delicacies. But no one dared to sit on that table. It belonged to the birthday boy, the Music Palace's Grand Elder, Ulushin. There were also many empty seats beside the dragon-shaped table. There were very few people who could sit there. Only the upper echelons of the 3 emperors and 4 sects were qualified to sit there. As for the small sects, they could only sit in the square. Even so, those who came to celebrate the birthday were proud of it. After all, not everyone was qualified to sit at the Music Palace's Grand Elder's birthday banquet. Palace Lorden, long time no see. A loud laugh was heard. A mighty old man walked forward with majestic step. He walked all the way to the dragon table. At this moment, there was a middle-aged man in luxurious robes. He was handsome and had an extraordinary temperament. It was the Palace Lord of Zhengla Palace, Ensui. Although Ensui was the Palace Lord, the one who truly represented the sect's will above him was Grand Elder Ulushin. Pavilion Lord Ji, you came in person. Palace Master and stepped out with a smile and greeted the Pavilion Master of Rune Source Pavilion. Pavilion. Pavilion Lord. By Pavilion Lord, Pavilion Lord. Pavilion Master Ji said with a smile. He took off his interspatial ring and handed it to a Taoist apprentice of the Music Palace who was waiting respectfully beside him. Pavilion Master Ji, we are honored by your presence. Your presence brings light to my humble Music Palace. You even brought a gift, isn't this too much? Please take a seat. Palace Mistress and extended her hand in invitation. Please. Pavilion Master Ji sat down with a smile on his face. His seat was right next to the dragon table. This was a grand treatment that the other birthday celebrants could not compare to. Sect Master Tang of the Herb Hall has arrived. Palace Lord and was excited. She went up to him. Ha ha ha, it's old man Li's 600th birthday. How can I not give you face? Here are 500 pills. They're all 7th grade and above. Among them, there are 3 royal grade pills to help Grand Elder Lu break through to the Emperor realm. Many people looked at Master Tang in shock. How extravagant! Although he was showing off a little, the gift was very valuable. Master Tang, please take a seat. Palace Lord An's smile widened. There were 500 7th grade pills, king grade. There must be 8th grade venerated pills among them. Of course, the most valuable items were the 3 emperor grade pills. When the Supreme Elder heard this from behind, he was probably grinning from ear to ear. Nanao's gift is here. On behalf of Emperor Xianyuan Gaoyan, I wish Grand Elder Lo to enter the Emperor realm. An armored general stepped into the field. Behind him were two Renhuangs with extremely powerful auras. They represented the Xianyuan family, one of the top overlords of the southern region, the Nan-Ao Empire. General, please take a seat. Palace Lord An received them personally. Her heart was trembling violently. Although the Xianyuan family did not send any emperor-level cultivators to oversee the situation, and not even a direct member of the royal family was present, these three generals were all Renhuang cultivators. They were no less important than sect leader Tang and pavilion master Ji. After all, they were one of the top overlords of the southern region. They were powerful. Moreover, this gift was from Xianyuan Gaoyan. A 9-star emperor's gift was too valuable. Even if they did not send anyone, they did not need to bring gift. Just a word from Xianyuan Gaoyan was enough to let all the martial artists in the southern region know how prosperous Lo Palace was. Elder Qi of the Blazing Sun Temple is here. Elder Meng of the Sword Sect is here. Arhat Hall Master San Luo and 4 Luo Hall Masters are here to celebrate. Boom! The 3 voices rang out. Everyone in the square immediately stood up. Sword Sect, Sage Temple, and Arhat Hall. 3 of the 4 top sect masters had sent people here. This face. Ha ha, this old man is just an elder of a lousy sect. How could you all come here personally? It's my honor, my honor. Bold laughter rang out in the hall. Then, everyone saw the Supreme Elder of Lu Palace step out and personally greet the people of the 3 sects. Elder Lu, congratulations. Elder Meng waved his hand. A disciple of the sword sect behind him presented an immortal sword and handed it to Lu Palace's apprentice. Elder Qi of the Blazing Sun Temple took out a small furnace from his sleeve and said with a serious face, "There is a wisp of Yang spirit flame in this furnace. This is too precious. Please take a seat." Luelvi Xian gave the apprentice beside him a look. The apprentice carefully took it as if he was inviting a god. The Lord of the Sage Temple, Yang Spirit, a 9-star great emperor. He had the same status as Xianyuan Gaoyan. He had the power of fire. The Tao fire he condensed contained the martial will of the great emperor. Not only could it be comprehended by the disciples of Lu Palace, but the other elders, including Palace Master and Lu Lv Xian, could also comprehend the martial will of the great emperor from the Tao fire. It was extremely precious. Ha ha ha, congratulations. You old fart, you're about to step into the great emperor realm. A shirtless man with bulging muscles said. He was full of strength. Old fart? Luelv Xian's face suddenly changed, but he quickly recovered and said with a smile, "Lord San Luo, it's working. I was lucky to see the opportunity of the great emperor realm." "Then you're just lucky. Ha ha ha, we didn't bring any gift." Another burly man laughed. His voice was like thunder. His laugh caused the faces of everyone in the music palace to darken. While the Arhat Temple was one of the top 4 sects, and the Luo Emperor himself was incomparably ferocious, and the 9 hall lords under his command were all ferocious, today was the birthday of the Supreme Elder of the Music Palace, and they had called him an old fart. That was too rude and presumptuous. Chapter 1552. Translator, Transin Editor, Transin, how dare they not come to celebrate? Around the longevity platform, numerous disciples with outstanding auras were enraged. They were different from other disciples, they were the elites of U Palace, and were taught by the elders. Among them, there was also the eldest disciple of Palace Master. And are all the people of Arhat Palace so uneducated? The general from Southern Proud Empire, who came to celebrate Xianyuan Gaoyan's birthday, said, "Since when is it your turn to criticize whether I am educated or not?" San Luo Hall Master glared at him. "You!" General Nan Ao slammed his palm on the table and stood up. His eyes were sharp, and a strong fighting spirit was about to burst out from his body. Sanluo Hall Master is bold and unrestrained, it's just a joke. Today is my birthday, please don't hurt our friendship. Ulvxian saw this and smiled. Southern proud Xianyuan clan and Arhat Palace had always been at odds because Emperor Luo hooked up with one of Xianyuan Gaoyan's beloved concubines. This matter was still talked about by later generations. The experts under the two great emperors naturally didn't like each other. I will give you face, I won't bicker with him. Nanao Ji is narrow-minded. Old man Le doesn't mind, but he came out to stir up trouble. By the way, we didn't bring a birthday gift this time, you won't be unhappy, right? Sanluo Hall Master was 2.5 heads taller than Ulvxian. His tower-like body slightly leaned down and looked at him with a smile. General Nanao was so angry that his face trembled. The other side spoke without thinking, but now he was narrow-minded. He endured it and sat back, turning his face to the side. Ulvxian smiled and replied, Arhat Palace experts can celebrate the old man's birthday, it is the old man's honor, why would I care about the formalities? I already said that old man Le won't care. Us brothers coming to watch your show is already full of sincerity, ha ha. Sanluo Hall Master laughed. His wide palm patted Grand Elder Le Gong's shoulder. Every time it fell, Ulvxian's body slanted. Take a seat, you two. Ulvxian's blood was rushing uncontrollably under the other's palm. He felt very uncomfortable, but he endured it and didn't act up. When this scene fell into the eyes of the disciples, it made them even more dissatisfied. Did the Arhat Palace come to celebrate the birthday, or did they deliberately embarrass the Grand Elder? Third Luo Hall Master and fourth Luo Hall Master didn't care at all. They swaggered into their seats with their hands behind their back. They even sat beside that Nanao general. Perhaps they hadn't taken a bath after training. A wild aura mixed with the stench of men's sweat made the other party want to cover his nose and run away. At this time, Ulvxian looked up into the distance, as if expecting some people to appear. Unfortunately, the vast void was silent, and the person he was waiting for did not arrive. The martial Ning Empire and the Northern Pride Li family probably wouldn't send anyone over. Ulvxian secretly sighed and looked up. His face regained its vigor as he walked to the table and picked up a cup of wine. He solemnly raised it towards the sky and said, Old man's birthday, this first cup of wine is a toast to the heaven and earth, to thank this land for its nurturing, allowing the old man to see through the Emperor's Tao and heaven's mysteries. May the martial Tao of the southern domain prosper and heroes emerge one after another. After that, the wine cup slowly tilted, and the fragrant wine poured out at his feet. To the heaven and earth, may the martial Tao of the southern domain prosper and heroes emerge one after another. In the square, thousands of experts stood up at the same time and solemnly raised their cups to the heaven. The second cup of wine is a toast to the ancestors of the Music Palace. They passed down their sound techniques to me. May the sect prosper, may the disciples' future be boundless. Ulvxian turned to face the Immortal Palace, picked up the cup and drank. Seniors of the Music Palace, Old Meng of the Sword Sect, Old Chi of the Temple, and Nanao General all looked solemn. Even the two bold Arhat Hall Masters restrained their frivolity and became incomparably serious. Although the people present were from different sect, no matter which sect they were from, they were all the pride of the southern domain. For example, sects with a long history like the Three Emperors and Four Sects, the Music Palace, and the Origin of Runes Pavilion had given birth to countless seniors that were worthy of respect. It was precisely those seniors that had created the current prosperity of the Southern Territory, so they should be respected. This third cup of wine is a toast to the heroes who have spared no effort to come to the Music Palace to participate in the birthday banquet. The old man's heart is filled with gratitude. As the Taoist child filled the cup, Ulvxian once again raised it, bowed deeply and drank with tears in his eyes. He was indeed very emotional. Congratulations to Elder Lu for seeing the Emperor realm and becoming one of the top forces of the southern domain. No one dared to neglect and shouted in unison. Lu Lvxin had reached the great circle of the Emperor realm. After the birthday banquet, he would summon the Emperor Tribulation and be baptized by the Emperor Tribulation to forge his Emperor body. From today onwards, the Music Palace would also step into the top Overlord forces. The main difference between the top forces and the Overlord forces was that the former had no Emperor while the latter had the support of Emperor Realm. Once Lu Lvxn became an Emperor, the sect would naturally rise by one level. Of course, even if the Music Palace had an Emperor Realm expert, it was still very weak compared to the 3 sovereigns and 4 sects. The gap between the two was still extremely huge. The 3 sovereigns and 4 sects had imperial lords and 9-star great emperors. In the sect, there were also many Emperor Yuan powerhouses and half-step Emperor Realm experts. And the Music Palace only had Lu Lvxin, and he would become the weakest 1-star Emperor Realm expert, completely incomparable to the 3 sovereigns and 4 sects. Those emperor clans that had stood in the southern domain for thousands of years were far stronger than the Music Palace. Even so, the Music Palace was still worth celebrating. After all, the sect was about to give birth to Emperor Yuan. At least, it would firmly suppress all the first-rate forces. Otherwise, why would Pavilion Master Ji and Tang Du come in person? Because in the future, their cultivation level would no longer be equal to Lu Lvxn. The other party would be stronger than them. Moreover, taking advantage of this birthday banquet, they could witness how Lu Lvxin survived the Emperor Tribulation. This would also have a great impact on Master Tang and Pavilion Master Ji. It would be convenient for them to comprehend the Tao. Everyone, please take a seat and enjoy the delicacies. These are all monster beasts hunted by our disciples and king-level ingredients cultivated by the sect. No need to be restrained, Palace Master and said politely and sat next to Lu Lvxin. Elder Lu has comprehended the mysteries of the Emperor's path. I'm really envious. I don't know when we old bones will have Elder Li's good fortune. I'm afraid Sect Master Su has no hope in this lifetime, ha ha ha. Everyone in the audience laughed and chatted. In the martial world, every Tao can be understood to the extreme, and the Emperor's path is broad and profound. It is the pinnacle of the Tao. Everyone, settle down and cultivate. You will all have a chance, Lu Lvxin said with a smile. Everyone had a chance? Yes, everyone had a chance, but not everyone could reach the pinnacle. In the Divine Wilderness continent, many peak Renhuangs couldn't take that step even when they died. Only the people of the 3 sovereigns and 4 sects could do that and master the mysteries of the Emperor's path. Today, in order to celebrate Lu Lvxin's birthday, one of the 3 sovereigns and 3 of the 4 sects came. It was really a grand occasion. By the way, Elder Lu is about to step into the Emperor realm. Why didn't the Martial Ning Kingdom and the Li family send anyone over? The Martial Ning Kingdom's royal family has changed. Now, the ones in control of the Martial Ning Kingdom are the members of the 3rd lineage of the Ning clan. They need to stabilize their rule. The Li family has always thought highly of themselves. After all, they were the direct descendants of the proud God Empire, and they are located in the north. It's normal that they don't want to come. Marshal Ning and the Li family aren't coming, and the Night Net Palace isn't sending anyone either. It's really... Someone stopped in time and looked around cautiously. When he saw that no one from the subordinate forces of the Night Net Palace was present, he was slightly relieved. The Night Net Palace was a sect formed by women and had never interacted with the outside world. Elder Lu had stepped into the Emperor realm, so it was not wrong for them not to come. On the other hand, the Great Jing Empire and Dan Go, who has settled in our southern region, have no Emperor realm backing them. In fact, they are only first-rate forces. Yet, they didn't come to celebrate Elder Li's birthday. They are clearly looking down on the Night Net Palace. This is a great disrespect to Elder Lo. It is unforgivable, someone said angrily, as if the Jing Empire and Dan Gu had committed a great crime. Chapter 1553. Translator, Naoibo Studio Editor. Naoibo Studio Dan Ji's grand gift. The Grand Elder of the Music Palace had entered the Emperor realm. Both his personal status and the status of the sect would rise to another level in the entire southern region. Today was the birthday banquet, and all the heroes had come to offer their blessings. The 3 sovereigns and 4 sects had specially sent people here. The Zheng clan and Dan Ji's people were absent. Could it be that they looked down on them? They were arrogant. In an instant, the entire square was filled with the topic of Dan Gu and the Zheng clan. Everyone was discussing it. In fact, many people knew that there was a big reason why Dan Gu and the Zheng clan were not present. 3 years ago, Nan Ao had launched a surprise attack on the Wan Cultivator Alliance and wanted to annex it, although there were many unexpected factors that delayed the war. But in the end, the 2 sides still fought fiercely in Feng City. In that battle, Feng City suffered countless casualties. Even though the Night Net Palace had joined in, they still could not change the situation. They even lost the life of the Night Net Palace's Grand Elder. And Ulvxin stood on the side of the Xianyuan family and personally attacked Dan Ji's pavilion master, Qin Hao. This was the reason why the Zheng clan and Dan Gu did not come. Ulvxin coveted the treasures that Qin Hao had obtained on the Coiling Dragon Peak. He killed the Wan Cultivator Alliance's martial artists in front of the battle and forced him to hand over the Dragon Spirit Dharma idol and the enchantment scripture. Qin Hao had died several times in the hands of the Grand Elder of the Music Palace. The enmity between the 2 sides could not be reconciled. Why would Dan Gu send people to celebrate Ulvxin's birthday today? Listening to the discussion below, the figure of a white-haired young man gradually appeared in Ulvxin's mind. At this moment, his face was extremely gloomy. What he had done back then, all the sect in the southern region wanted to do. Who didn't want to have the Spirit Emperor's lost art? He dared to stand out and snatch it. The weak were prey to the strong, the survival of the fittest. Even if he did not snatch it, once the Wan Cultivator Alliance was defeated, the enchantment scripture would fall into the hands of the Xianyuan family. Why wouldn't he fight? Unfortunately, in the end, the loser was actually Nan Ao. Ulvxin, you don't have to brood over the past. Qin Hao is a junior who is too bright and doesn't understand the principle that the tallest tree in the forest will be the first to be destroyed by the wind. He relied on his talent and wantonly displayed it. He even crowned himself with the reputation of suppressing a generation in the southern region. He didn't even show the slightest bit of respect to us, the seniors of the southern region. People like him won't live long, Tang Du said in a drawn-out tone. During the auction in Golden Light City, he had suffered a lot in the hands of Qin Hao. His nephew, Tang Xingchen, had also lost his life in the hands of that man. He was full of resentment and wished he could capture Qin Hao and skin him in public to vent his anger. If it weren't for the support of the Ning family, not to mention a junior from Xiliang, even the Myriad Cultivator Alliance, which had recovered the name of the state of Jing, wouldn't have survived until today. I heard that the Zheng dynasty sent a family member to participate in the Divine Palace Omen with Qin Hao. I wonder how he is doing now. Someone said cautiously. The Divine Palace was the supreme martial house that every martial artist in the continent yearned for. It was the cradle for cultivating great emperors, and it had even produced a divine-level expert. If Qin Hao stood out among the tens of thousands of participants in the Divine Palace and received special training from the higher-ups of the Divine Palace, it would be disadvantageous to many forces in the southern region after he came out. After all, the Spirit Beast sect, the Music Palace, and so on had all tried to take his life. He received special training from the powerhouses of the Divine Palace? Bah! Tang Du spat. A disrespectful and arrogant madman. I'm afraid he won't even be able to step into the gate of the Divine Palace. Perhaps he would have already died in the assessment. That's right. The geniuses of the 4 regions of the continent will gather here. Qin Hao won't have a chance to stand out. Ha ha ha. It's okay if Dangu doesn't come to celebrate the birthday. If he dares to send someone here, the old man will slap them back. Everyone laughed and said, bang. The golden-armored general of Nan Ao slammed his fist on the banquet table. The wine cup jumped and the table cracked. There seemed to be flames of anger between his eyebrows. He shouted, enough! Don't mention that person again. Qin Hao was a thorn in the heart of the Xianyuan royal family. He was deeply stabbed in everyone's heart. Xianyuan Feng died at his hands, and the second prince, Xianyuan Wuying, also became crazy because of him. They hoped that Prince Jie could successfully erase this scourge from the world during the Divine Palace's expedition. After this punch fell, the square suddenly became silent. No one dared to touch Nan Ao's scars again. At the banquet, Hall Master Sanluo crossed his arms and sneered. He whispered softly, Dangu doesn't dare to send someone here? Ha. We'll know the result soon. Today, he didn't come to watch Lu Lvxian's birthday banquet. He came to watch a funeral banquet. Whoosh, whoosh. Suddenly, the sound of something breaking through the air came from the distant horizon. The sharp sound seemed to have pierced the great path of space as it surged toward the main peak of the music palace. Everyone present was a master cultivator, and they all sensed several powerful auras approaching at the same time. When they turned to look, they saw 3 flowing lights barging into the sacred ground of the music palace. They openly took to the air, and stood in midair above the square in an instant. At the birthday banquet of the Music Palace's Grand Supreme Elder, everyone had walked all the way from the foot of the mountain. However, at this moment, someone was actually taking to the air. Was this a provocation? Crash! Many people got up, and many of the Music Palace's disciples looked coldly at the uninvited guests in the air. At this moment, 3 figures stood in midair. Their auras were extraordinary, and at a glance, they gave off a feeling of endless sharpness. These 3 people were not very old, about 30 years old. The one in the lead was handsome, wearing a neat white robe. He stood there, and his body seemed to be filled with a kind of rhythm of the great path, as if it had merged into the music of the birthday banquet. It actually blended with the tunes played by hundreds of disciples, as if at this moment, he dominated the direction of the music. The one on the right was a sword cultivator, carrying 2 immortal swords on his back. His eyes were narrow and extremely cold, but his gaze was like 2 peerless swords stabbing at others. Many of the sect leaders present did not dare to look directly at him. The first impression Elder Meng of the Sword sect had when he saw this person was that he thought to himself, what a swordsman. However, when they looked at the person on the left, the square instantly exploded, and the face of the birthday girl, Lu Lvxian, was completely twisted. The person on the left was extremely tall and burly, and his body was full of explosive muscles. His wild aura was even stronger than that of Sanluo Hall Master. Obviously, this person's physical body was extraordinary. What was infuriating was that this burly man was carrying a coffin on his shoulder. On the orders of Pavilion Lord Qin Hao, I have come to celebrate Lu Lvxian's birthday. Lei Jiao spat out an extremely cold voice. After he finished speaking, he slowly raised his palm and gently flung it. Boom! The coffin on his shoulder flew out and landed heavily in front of Lu Lvxian. At this moment, everyone's heart sank, as if it had been smashed by the coffin. Chapter 1554. It was the 600th birthday of the Grand Elder of the Music Palace, and all the heroes of the southern region had come to celebrate it. After the birthday banquet, everyone would be able to see him break through to the Emperor realm. But now, before the birthday banquet was over, someone had come with a coffin and said it was a gift for the Grand Elder of the Music Palace. The person who had prepared the gift was Qin Hao. Boom! The black coffin fell to the ground, extremely heavy, as if it had hit the hearts of everyone. The celebration of the birthday banquet was washed away, and countless guests looked at the three figures in the air, unable to react for a moment. Not only the guests, but Ulvxian himself was also stunned. Today was his birthday, and someone had come with a coffin. Even though he was extremely angry, he did not lose his mind. These three people all had excellent temperaments, and from their accents, they did not seem to be warriors of the southern region. The burly young man said that he had come on the orders of Qin Hao. Was it true or not? 3 years ago, Qin Hao had participated in the Divine Palace Omen and was no longer in the southern region. Someone had used his name to send a coffin. Could it be that they wanted to stir up trouble and cause a war between the Music Palace and Dan Gu to profit from it? Pavilion Master Qin knows that Elder Yu is greedy and wants to take everything for himself, so he specially prepared 2 gifts for you. If the coffin does not fit, I have another one here, said the white-robed young man. The white-robed young man in the middle said. He stretched out his hand, and a ball of light bloomed from his palm. A broken gray bell flew out, its body full of rusty holes. With a bang, it landed on the lid of the coffin, shaking off a layer of dust. A bell. The eyes of countless guests widened. Today was really presumptuous. An angry roar reverberated, and one person could not help but explode. Among the elite disciples of the Music Palace at the side of the birthday banquet, the one with the most outstanding temperament was a handsome young man who stood out from the crowd. His body trembled violently, and his black hair swayed in the air. His eyes were burning with anger, and his slender fingers clasped the Guqin spirit beneath him and pulled it open. He was the most outstanding disciple of the Music Palace, the personal disciple of Palace Masterin, the genius of sound who had once fought to a draw with Chang Hello. He was the true number 1 person among the younger generation of the Music Palace, Lin Xiao. At this moment, Lin Xiao was furious. Today was the Grand Supreme Elder's birthday, and someone had actually come to deliver the coffin and funeral bell. Regardless of whether the other party was Dan Ji's people or not, the coffin and that rotten bell were absolutely intolerable. Lin Xiao's Guqin spirit flickered with surging soul light. Within the purple venerable level aura, there was a faint golden glow. Clearly, he had stepped into the half-step Renhuang realm. His strength was definitely at the forefront among his peers in the southern mountain range. He stared at the 3 people in the air as he tightened his fingers on the zither strings. Waves of yuan qi crazily converged into the zither, and with a clang sound, the zither strings shot out. Instantly, a dazzling light was like 1,000 whirling sharp blades, piercing through the air and slashing towards Lei Jiao and the others. In the square there were cries of surprise. The personal disciple of Palace Master and was indeed extraordinarily talented. He had actually stepped into the half-step Renhuang realm. The power of his attack was not to be underestimated. From Lin Zhao's aggressive manner, it was not difficult to see that he would not leave the other party alive. He was prepared to kill the 3 of them on the spot. In the air, Feng Qianli and Lei Jiao stood quietly. The powerful attack was coming, but they were not moved at all. Feng Qianli even cast a disdainful look at Lin Xiao. How dare he show off with such strength? Now that they were half-step great emperors, they had comprehended their own unique rules of the Great Path. Sharp blades filled the sky, filling the entire space. When they fell at the same time, they seemed to be able to cut the 3 of them into minced meat in an instant. At this moment, Su Jin slowly moved. He looked at Lin Xiao, his mouth moving slightly, and no one knew what he was saying. Suddenly, the space in the square became still. The whirling blades actually stopped above the 3 people's heads, unable to cut down even half an inch. An invisible rhythm swept out from Su Jin's body. It seemed ethereal, but it was like a great flood. The huge force swept up the sharp blades that were flying in the air, and all of them flew back to Lin Zhao's position, slashing down fiercely. Lin Zhao's face suddenly trembled. He roared, and his fingers pulled the strings at the same time, slapping heavily at the Guqin spirit. Hum! The Guqin spirit trembled. Endless musical notes jumped out, covering the sky and the sun. They formed an endless light that collided violently with the falling blades. To Lin Zhao's horror, the blades formed by his hands actually shattered the endless musical notes. Then, rays of sharp light slashed down. His Guqin spirit shattered and exploded. Lin Zhao spat out a mouthful of blood as he flew back miserably. What? All the guests were shocked. A half-step Renhuang realm cultivator could not even withstand a single blow. Renhuang, Palace Master, and spat out with an extremely cold expression. As the Palace Master, he was also a Renhuang. His cultivation was at the 8th level of the Renhuang realm. He felt Renhuang will from Su Jin's body. Moreover, Su Jin's will was very strong. He was not as simple as an ordinary Renhuang. This person's cultivation was extraordinary. How is this possible? Many strong cultivators were even more shocked when they heard Palace Master and say Renhuang. The young man in white who defeated Lin Zhao with a single blow looked to be about 30 years old. A 30-year-old Renhuang with such talent. We came here with treasures. Isn't Music Palace's hospitality a little too rude? Su Jin said coldly. There was no joy on his face after defeating the top genius of Music Palace with a single blow. Ulv stared at him. He felt as if a mountain had blocked his heart. He almost spat out blood. Come here with treasures? Who would bring a coffin and a funeral bell to celebrate someone's birthday? Which orthodoxy are you three from? Has old man offended you in any way? Ulv asked, suppressing the depression in his heart. We don't have much time. Kill him yourself. That way, you can have a good time and avoid dirtying my hands, Feng Qianli said coldly. After this, he was in a hurry to return to the East Continent. You arrogant brat, Music Palace does not allow you to cause trouble. A majestic elder of Music Palace rose into the air from Palace Master An's side, allowing the Grand Elder to kill himself without putting up a fight. Such arrogance was intolerable. Golden flames wrapped around the elder's body. The will of Renhuang swept forward. The might of the great path shook the void. An old hand reached out and pressed down on Feng Qianli's head. At the same time, Palace Lord and gave another elder a look. After receiving the signal from the Palace Lord, the other elder followed closely behind. His Renhuang aura surged around him, and his fist momentum seemed to be able to shatter the heavens and the earth. The surging fist radiance gushed forward as they joined forces to kill Feng Qianli. Humph! Feng Qianli took a step forward. Infinite sword will circled around him. The sword will press down on the elder. His sharp and narrow eyes pierced through the void. Renhuang will formed a sword in the air. Two beams of sword qi seemed to be born out of thin air. They suddenly appeared in front of the Music Palace elder, and pierced through his will of Renhuang, passing through his body. PFFTT. Like an arrow shot at an eagle, the two Music Palace elders fell one after the other. Before they hit the ground, their spiritual souls were pierced by the extreme sword will and they died. Many guests were shocked. Another 30-year-old Renhuang, the Emperor of Swords. This person's sword will was extremely fierce and overbearing. Everyone's eyes fell on Su Jin and the other two. When did such peerless geniuses of the younger generation appear in the southern region? They were around 30 years old, but not only had they entered the Renhuang plane, but their will of Renhuang was also extremely strong. Upper Renhuang plane, Humph. Palace Master and had witnessed the death of two elders. Naturally, he would not allow them to continue. He originally thought that even if these three unfamiliar young men had entered the Renhuang Plain, they would not be too strong. Although one of them had defeated Lin Xiao, he did not take his life. Then, he would just let the elders teach them a lesson. But who knew that the other party's cultivation was so strong, especially this swordsman? He took the lives of 2 Music Palace elders with one move. His methods were extremely ruthless. I don't care who is supporting you. Since you dare to come to Music Palace and behave so atrociously, you must pay with your life. You must die with my 2 elders. Palace Master and personally stepped forward. Golden light swirled around him. His long robe flapped wildly. Chapter 1555. Taking a step forward, Palace Lord and stepped into the air and stared at Feng Qianli. His soul light circled around his body like a rhythm. Following that, a soul flute appeared. He held the soul flute and played it. The sound of the flute flowed and gradually merged with the great path. Step by step, it approached Feng Qianli. With every step he took, his aura increased. At this moment, Palace Lord N's body seemed to have the power of the great path descending. His Renhuang will became stronger and stronger. The sound of the flute turned into turbulent sound waves. Layers of sound waves blasted forward. Flute spirit? Nice to look at but useless, Feng Qianli said coldly. He seemed to be saying it deliberately for Su Jin behind him to hear, because Su Jin's primordial spirit was also a flute. You'll know if it's useful or not when you try. Palace Lord An's voice sounded in the air. Then, his foot landed heavily. The entire square trembled. The soul flute burst forth with turbulent sound waves that crushed forward. Okay, I'll give you a chance. I'll let you have 3 moves. Feng Qianli stepped forward at the same time. He was like a sharp sword moving forward. His entire body exuded an extremely powerful sword will. Boom! The sound waves of the flute crushed and blasted Feng Qianli's chest. He took it head-on but was as immovable as Mount Tai. How could he be so strong? Everyone below was shocked. Palace Lord An's expression changed slightly. The sound of the great path continued to attack. He didn't stop. Every step closer to Feng Qianli, the sound waves became stronger. Even so, he still couldn't shake his opponent at all. Swoosh, swoosh. The sound of the flute became ear-piercing. The frequency of the vibration began to increase. Blurry phantoms kept separating from Palace Lord An. In an instant, they filled the square and surrounded Feng Qianli. Countless phantoms played at the same time. The sound of the flute resonated. It was as sharp as a sword. It pierced toward Feng Qianli, who was in the center. Palace Lord An was in the 8th level of the Renhuang Plain. At this moment, he used the superior sound technique of the Music Palace. Everyone felt that he was like a god. Even the heavens were dominated by his will. What a showy thing! Sword will whistled around Feng Qianli. No matter how many sound swords pierced him, they couldn't cause any real damage. They were all swallowed up by his boundless sword will. At this moment, he became impatient. He wasn't in the mood to wait for his opponent to attack a 3rd time. Sword light suddenly flashed from his narrow eyes. The sword light was dazzling. It was as if it could penetrate the spiritual soul directly. A sword strike. Crash. The phantoms in the entire space shattered and dissipated. The sword gleam pierced towards a certain location at a speed that could not be captured by the naked eye. That was where Palace Master An's actual body was. How is this possible? Palace Head An was unable to maintain his composure. His eyes were filled with shock. The strength of his opponent's sword intent had reached the level where he could break his illusory sound technique with a single thought. Furthermore, as the sword light continued to approach, Palace Head An felt that he could not fight back. It was as though there was a voice in his mind telling him that he would die. Be careful. The Grand Elder of Music Palace, Ulvxian, stepped on the ground and instantly appeared beside Palace Masterin. His old palm slashed down, his inner strength was dense and overbearing, actually breaking the sword light in half. At this moment, the sound of the flute had stopped. Palace head and was frozen in the air. His face and back were covered in cold sweat. He looked at Feng Qianli with fear in his eyes. This person was unfathomable, and his cultivation base was far above his. If not for the Supreme Elder's intervention, he would have already become a corpse. Boom! Below, the hearts of countless southern region sect masters trembled. She had been defeated. Palace Masterin, a dignified entertainment holy land that was about to become the overlord of the southern region, had actually been crushed by a junior. How could this not be shocking? The square was terrifyingly silent. Everyone felt as if their hearts had stopped beating. Even Elder Meng of Sword Sect looked at the young swordsman in the air with disbelief. If Elder Meng had seen the power of this person's swordsmanship in the past, he would have doubted whether Shou Wuck's sword was worthy of the title of the number 1 swordsmanship. But now Elder Meng would not doubt it, because Shou Wuck had returned. He had personally witnessed Shou Wuck stepping into the realm of Sword Emperor. At that moment, he had cried tears of joy. The entire upper echelon of Sword Sect had been extremely excited. Although no one knew what kind of teaching Shou Wuck had received, allowing him to break through 2 heavenly cycle realm from revered sword to become a Sword Emperor in 3 years. But now Elder Meng believed that there was indeed a place in the world that could allow a martial artist to be reborn and grow to an unimaginable level in 3 years. That place was called Divine Palace. As for the swordsman in the air, he also knew that this person was the personal disciple of Zhuiying Sword Emperor of the East Continent. His swordsmanship was the best in the world. If it were not for Shou Wuck, Feng Qianli would definitely be the strongest swordsman in the Divine Wilderness. Not only him, but the young man in white and the burly young man were peerless geniuses who had been trained by Divine Palace. Alas, I'm really old. Elder Meng smiled secretly, but he was very gratified in his heart. There were talents in every generation, each leading the way for hundreds of years. The new generation would replace the old. The future of the continent would be the world of these peerless geniuses. Elder Meng knew the details of Feng Qianli and the other 2, but Yu Luxin did not. At this moment, he was also shocked, but he felt more pressure from Feng Qianli, Su Jin, and Lei Jiao. These 3 people were stronger and more troublesome than he had imagined. You 3, why do you have to force us? What benefits did Qin Hao promise you? Yu Gong is willing to double. As long as you 3 are willing to go and take Qin Hao's head, 4 times is not a problem. The Grand Elder of Yu Gong said. He believed that these 3 young men were definitely not Dan Ji's people, let alone Qin Hao's subordinates, because they were too strong. What was Qin Hao's cultivation base? What right did a mere Yuan Venerate have to order such people around? They had most likely been bribed by Dan Gu with a large sum of money to deliberately find these 3 ruthless people to ruin his birthday banquet. How vicious! Many powerhouses of the southern region, who had come to congratulate him, looked at the Grand Elder of Yu Gong. These 3 uninvited guests had ruined the birthday banquet, killed 2 of Yu Gong's higher-ups, and almost lost Palace Master An's life. As the true ruler of Yu Gong, Yu Luxin actually did not take action to restore the sect's dignity and kill the offenders. Could it be that even he was feeling the pressure? Don't talk nonsense. For the sake of the sect's foundation, I advise you to commit suicide as an apology, Lei Jiao said expressionlessly. If this old man took the initiative, he might be able to protect the safety of the sect's disciples. Otherwise, if he continued to resist, the entire sect would not be able to protect itself. I believe everyone can clearly see my strength. To be honest, no one is a match for me. The Palace Master can't even withstand a single blow. If an old man like you were in my shoes, the result would be the same. Therefore, I'll have to trouble you to quickly die and lie in your own coffin. This will benefit all of us and save everyone's time." Feng Qianli sneered, his face full of arrogance. "Is there really no room for discussion? As long as the three of you are willing to stand on the old man's side, everything in Yugong will be yours to use," Yu Luxin said seriously. As soon as he said this, all the disciples of Yugong shuddered. The Grand Elder was about to break through to the Arch realm, yet he kept making concessions. Was the other party strong enough to threaten the survival of the sect? "Old man, you should understand the principle of karma and retribution. I don't want to do this either, but I have no choice. In fact, I don't know what my price is. You might as well ask him." Su Jin raised his arm and pointed to a certain corner of the plaza. In that inconspicuous corner, there was a lonely white-haired figure sitting there, quietly drinking wine. Chapter 1556. The original Su Jin no longer existed, and the current Su Jin was replaced by Godan's soul. Everything he had originated from Qin Hao, including his cultivation and life. The obsessions of the seven-peak venerables gathered the great Tao of Nirvana and transmitted it through the array to shape Godan's soul. As for Qin Hao, he had brought him into a brand new world and given him a brand new life. Therefore, he really didn't know what his position was in the other party's heart, and how much he was worth. Everyone looked at the corner of the square. In that large area, only a white-haired martial artist was sitting, and the rest of the guests were far away. He drank quietly, leisurely. He raised the pot and drank with his head held high. His simple movements revealed a special aura, as if he was one with the great Tao. At first glance, the white-haired martial artist's facial features seemed to directly invade Ulvxion's mind. His heart trembled fiercely, and everyone's heart trembled. Qin Hao. How could it be? How could he be here? He shouldn't be here. However, the truth wouldn't lie to everyone's eyes. It wasn't an illusion. The familiar white-haired face was the master of Dango, Qin Hao. Wine, not bad. Qin Hao slowly got up, carrying the wine pot and walking towards the square step by step. With a smile, he looked up at Ulvxion and said, "Senior Yu, how have you been?" Ulvxion's mind was blank. "I came in a hurry and prepared a coffin and a funeral bell. I don't know if Senior is satisfied. I see that Senior's face is pale, and your body is trembling. You seem to be angry. You're probably not satisfied." Qin Hao laughed and nodded to Old Meng. He continued, "Oh right, I'm not familiar with these three people. I didn't spend a lot of money to hire them to cause trouble like you think. I really didn't pay a cent. If they are willing, Senior can try to pay them to attack me." Truth, in all honesty, every word was true. He really didn't pay. Because money couldn't measure Su Jin. As for Lei Jiao and Feng Qianli, they really weren't familiar with each other. Perhaps they couldn't even be called ordinary friends. "Yes, I'm not familiar with him." Feng Qianli's face darkened slightly. He had only helped this time because he wanted to return the favor. This was the only time in his life that he wanted to return to the East Continent as soon as possible. Who would want to stay by the side of a lunatic who possessed the body of an evil soul? "I've never lacked money since I was young. Even if I did, I wouldn't kill him for you," Lei Jiao said seriously. He would rather fight a true martial emperor from the outside world than fight with Qin Hao. Even if the three of them joined forces, Zhou Wudao and Chang Helo wouldn't pose a threat to Qin Hao. It was very likely that they would be killed instead. Countless people looked at each other, speechless. Not familiar. If they weren't familiar with each other, who would be so bored as to risk losing their heads and come to the Music Palace to deliver Qin Hao's coffin? Especially at the Music Palace's Grand Elder's 600th birthday banquet. Who are you trying to fool with these words? Qin Hao, why are you here? Also, How is the holy son of the blazing sun temple? An old man in a blazing robe stepped out majestically. Elder Chi of the temple asked Qin Hao in a loud voice. Qin Hao was supposed to participate in the divine palace's omen, but he suddenly reappeared in the southern region. Elder Qi certainly had to inquire about Yu Qianyang's situation. I have no comment on why I'm here. As for Yu Qianyang, he's dead. Qin Hao looked at the other party and said coldly. What? Elder Qi was shocked. Yu Qianyang was dead? Tell the old man, who did it? The roar resounded through the world. Elder Qi didn't care whether it was true or not. It's me. Qin Hao replied faintly. Yu Qianyang colluded with Chang Hello to eliminate him, so he naturally couldn't let him live. Yu Qianyang was relieved of his endless reluctance to leave the world. You're courting death. Elder Qi shouted in a hoarse voice. Above his body, the majestic Renhuang flames of the Wei were released and swept across the world. The pressure of the might impacted the entire square. At this moment, he was like the incarnation of a blazing sun. The monstrous sacred fire spewed out and burned towards Qin Hao. Qin Hao glanced at him indifferently. You're not worthy to fight with me. I'll let you meet an old friend first. After he finished speaking, the roar of an ancient beast came from his storage ring. The roar was so fierce that it seemed to shatter the great Tao. Many martial artists with weaker cultivations were so frightened by this roar that they trembled and fell to the ground. Immediately after, the crowd watched in horror as a giant pitch-black beast, several dozen feet in size, descended. As its 4 feet touched the ground, the main peak of the music palace sank into the ground, and a giant palm as heavy as a mountain ruthlessly smashed down towards Old Man Qi's head. Elder Qi's spiritual soul suddenly trembled. The pressure coming from above his head was simply irresistible. He desperately burned the soul of the sacred fire and raised his palms to meet the attack. The two suddenly collided. At this moment, the majestic flames on Elder Qi's body were all scattered by the huge palm. He let out a panicked roar, and the arms that he had raised twisted, shattered, and exploded. The power of the huge palm that pressed down on him was unparalleled, crushing every bone in his body inch by inch. The force of the palm soaked into his spirit and will, destroying everything in his body. Even if his spiritual soul wanted to escape, it was shattered into nothingness by the huge palm. PFFTT. Blood spilled from the ground. As the giant palm slowly lifted, Elder Qi's shadow was no longer in the square. Only a horrible paste was left behind. Boom! Everyone's minds seemed to be shattered. It was as if they were also crushed by the giant palm. Elder Qi of the Sage Hall, a cultivator at the peak of Renhuang, was killed by a single palm. Countless people looked up at the giant ancient beast standing in front of Qin Hao. Many of them had participated in the auction in Golden Light City. At that time, the ancient beast in front of them was a pitiful creature that had been imprisoned in a cage and was covered in scars. Now, it killed Elder Qi of the Sage Hall, who had captured it back then, with a single palm. There is the aura of the Beast Emperor, someone said in a daze. Everyone felt a wisp of the aura of the Beast Emperor coming from this giant black centaur. Even though it had not truly stepped into the Emperor plane, it had already laid a solid foundation for the Beast Emperor. Like the Supreme Elder of the Music Palace, it could summon the tribulation of the Beast Emperor at any time and reach a higher level. At this moment, Master Tang, who was at the birthday banquet, silently shrank into the dense crowd. Is there anyone else who wants to ask? Qin Hao's gaze swept across all the heroes of the southern region. Many of them had appeared at the auction in Golden Light City. Back then, when Qin Hao and Chang Hello had fought on the arena, these heroes of the southern region had pointed fingers at Qin Hao. Now they looked up to him, and there was even a trace of fear in their eyes. Coiling Dragon Mountain, I obtained the secrets of the Spirit Emperor Li Wanji's matrix spirit. Because I was not a warrior of the southern region, you asked me to hand it over unconditionally. If I did not comply, you would have suppressed me. Feng City, how many cultivators of the alliance of 10,000 cultivators fought a bloody battle to defend their home against Nan Ao, and did not hesitate to sacrifice themselves to stop them. You Luxin, you are a respected senior in the southern region, a supreme elder of the Music Palace Holy Land, but because of personal greed, you stirred up the war and killed countless cultivators of the Alliance of Cultivators. Do you feel guilty? Do you have a clear conscience? Qin Hao's voice was like thunder as he stared at the white-haired old man. He was a senior of the generation, but his heart was vicious and ruthless. Qin Hao could let go of the dragon spirit Dharma form. Everyone wanted good things. This was understandable. However, who would pay for the lives of the cultivators of the alliance of 10,000 cultivators? Who would pay for the life of the great elder of the Night Luo Palace? Even though Yu Luxin was not the real culprit, he helped the evildoer. Under the pretext of helping the Xianyuan family, in order to satisfy his own greed, he killed others by hook or by crook. That day, he really killed gods and Buddhas who blocked his way. Did the people who died tragically die in vain? Even if Qin Hao magnanimously let him go, the countless dead souls of the alliance of 10,000 cultivators who died in Feng City would never allow it. A debt of blood must be paid with blood. Yu Luxin's sin must be borne by him. Chapter 1557. 3 years had passed since the Battle of Feng City. Although the main parties were the Southern Proud Empire and the Myriad Cultivator Alliance, the Grand Elder of the Kola Palace did intervene as an outsider. The powerhouses would never forget that tragic battle. The Myriad Cultivator Alliance was almost destroyed, and Yu Luxin had killed Qin Hao several times. Today, he was here to collect his debt. Ha ha ha! Yu Luxin raised his head and laughed. Did he want to pay with blood? He didn't hide. Yes, I killed many people. I admit it. But if you want to talk about guilt, you can ask the thousands of people here. Have they ever felt guilty? Martial arts cultivation had always been based on strength. When treasures appeared in the world, only the strong were worthy of possessing them. In today's birthday banquet, which famous powerhouse had never had their hands stained with blood? Even the blood of their family and friends. Only by stepping on corpses step by step could a powerhouse stand at the peak. I don't know what guilt is. Old man, since I am the grand elder of a sect, my responsibility is to strengthen the sect, to make outsiders respect me, and to let the disciples hold their heads high and be proud. If I can bring the Music Palace to glory, so what if I take your treasures? For the sake of the sect, I am worthy of the responsibility. For the sake of the disciples, old man is even more worthy of my conscience. Becoming a powerful sect, becoming an overlord force, stepping into the Dharch realm, and letting the disciples have a safe backing, what crime did he commit? Up until now, the Music Palace had never produced a Dharch realm powerhouse. This was the sect's sorrow, but it was also a shame. The dignified number 1 sound technique Sacred Land in the southern region had no Dharch realm powerhouse to preach the Tao. How would the people of the other 3 regions view them? Yu Luxin wanted to become a Dharch too much. He believed that he had enough ability to lead the sect to greater glory. The Music Palace would flourish in his hands and no longer be discriminated against by the other 3 regions, especially the East Continent. What he wanted was the awe of others. What he wanted was to be able to stand shoulder to shoulder with the overlords of the 3 sovereigns and 4 sections. He wanted everyone to be envious and admire the disciples of the Music Palace. Was he wrong? Why do you need to deliver the coffin? Isn't it just a battle? What's there to be afraid of? If you have enough strength, you can still step on old man's head. When that time comes, none of the Music Palace disciples will give you the name of Kwazue. They will only fear you, and hide from you. Yu Lu roared. Supreme Elder. Many Music Palace disciples were envious. That's right, Ulvxin had killed a lot of cultivators from the Wanxiu Union, and had also tried to kill Qin Hao. However, everything he had done was for the sake of the sect's strength, to not let the 3 sovereigns and 4 sects look down on them, and for the disciples to be able to raise their heads and challenge the successors of the overlords. Even if he was guilty to the world, he had a clear conscience for the music palace. If this is the way of the emperor that you have comprehended, then there is no need for your way to exist, and so is the music palace. Plundering others to fulfill one's own Tao, what was the difference between them and the evil soul? Qin Hao looked at the music palace, immortal palace. It really shouldn't exist, so as to avoid misleading people. Is that so? The old man wants to see what ability you have to make the music palace disappear from the southern region, with the 3 brats you have recruited? Forgive the old man for speaking bluntly, but they are not qualified. Ulvxin stepped into the void, and heaven and earth trembled. He sat in the air and waved his hand. Bright soul light bloomed, and a Guqin spirit condensed under him. At this moment, the hair of the supreme elder of the music palace fluttered, and his body was filled with the light of Renhuang. He was like an immortal sitting in the air, and the strings of the Guqin under his hands were clanging. The will of the Guqin resonated with the great path, dominating the world. Su Jin, Lei Jiao, and Feng Qianli were all very strong. Even Ulvxin couldn't completely see through these 3 people. But if it was a battle, he would never lose. Countless guests in the square saw this scene and spontaneously scattered to the periphery. Next would be the battle of the ultimate Renhuang. The 3 young men under Qin Hao were very strong. In addition, there was a tyrannical ancient beast that was half a step into the beast emperor level. But how could the supreme elder of the music palace be weak? He had also perfected the rules and had seen through the mysteries of the emperor's path. He could summon the emperor's tribulation at any time, and thus become the Zither emperor. This battle would be extremely fierce. Dong. Su Jin stepped into the void and walked to the opposite side of Ulvxin. Bright soul light flickered around him, and a soul flute appeared in his palm. Then, the jade flute was placed under his lip. In this battle, Ulvxin was not worthy of Qin Hao to fight. The sound of the Guqin flowed, and the sound of the flute murmured. The 2 faced each other in the void, and their auras erupted at the same time, forming 2 melodic whirlwinds that circled above their bodies. The ultimate Renhuang confronted each other, and the sound of the Guqin and the flute intertwined, penetrating each other crazily, trying to suppress each other. On the main peak of the music palace, the 2 melodies spread rapidly, radiating toward the endless area in the distance. As the melodies swept past, the earth cracked, the river surged like a huge wave, and the hills collapsed one after another. And in the square, even though countless guests were far away from the battle, they still felt their heads buzzing wildly, as if they were about to be shattered by the intertwined melody of the Guqin and the flute. Even their spiritual souls were in turmoil. What an outstanding talent! Many of the older cultivators of the southern region were surprised. The young man with the flute was competing with the supreme elder of the music palace in sound, and he was not at a disadvantage at all. Could it be that he also had 1 foot in the emperor's path? Kid, who is this person's disciple? At this moment, Elder Meng stood together with Qin Hao. He was not here to celebrate the birthday, but because Qin Hao had asked Shouwuk to speak on his behalf, and he had asked Elder Meng to come. Otherwise, he would not have attended Ulvxin's birthday banquet. Not only him, but many swordsmen of the sword sect were also unwilling to go. I taught him. Qin Hao said with a smile, "Do you believe me?" Chapter 1558. Most of Guden's current cultivation came from the inheritance left by Su Jin. The other part was the essence of the Yaoguang Peak. As for actual combat, It was honed step by following Qin Hao in the illusory palace, accumulating blood and countless scars. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that it was personally trained by Qin Hao. Elder Meng nodded gently. In the past, he would find it hard to believe. However, after witnessing the changes after Shou Wux's return, he felt that Qin Hao's words were very credible. He continued to ask, if this boy unleashes his full cultivation, how will he compare to the old man? Elder Meng of the Sword Sect had comprehended the laws and was a half-step Sword Emperor. How would Guden compare to Elder Meng? Elder Meng was a senior who had been famous in the southern region for a long time. No matter what, he wouldn't and shouldn't compare himself to a junior. He was just worried. He was worried that Su Jin wouldn't be a match for Yulushin. This Grand Elder of the Music Palace used to be on par with Elder Meng of the Sword Sect. But now, their strength was very different. Although they both had one foot in the Emperor realm, Elder Meng's half-step Emperor realm was only in its infancy. Yulushin, on the other hand, had completely seen through the mysteries of the Emperor realm. He had reached the peak of the Emperor realm and could become a true Emperor at any time. Elder Meng was obviously weaker than the other. If Su Jin couldn't compare to Elder Meng, this battle would be very disadvantageous. Perhaps Qin Hao should consider letting Lei Jiao and Feng Qianli join forces with him. Qin Hao could understand the true meaning of Elder Meng's words. He smiled calmly. Don't worry, the truth will tell you the answer. Would he lose? If he hadn't entered the Divine Palace and been tempered by the Hidden Path waterfall and the mysterious Sky Karst cave, he might have lost. After all, Yulushin had the Emperor Realm will and could be considered a true emperor. At present, he only lacked the refinement of the Emperor Tribulation. No matter how talented the outside world's geniuses were, no matter how high the grade of their origin spirit, it was difficult to cross the gap between the Emperor Realm and the Emperor Realm. It was normal to lose. It was a pity that the training they had received in the Divine Palace far exceeded the martial arts understanding of the outside world. Even though Su Jin was only in the Renhuang Plain, defeating the Supreme Elder of the Music Palace was not difficult. At this time, the two people in the void were enveloped by the light of the Great Path. The will of Renhuang emanating from them was extremely ferocious. The two rhythms converged and penetrated each other. Both wanted to suppress the other under their own rhythmic technique. Su Jin's expression was calm as the sound of the flute flowed. His attacks were orderly and unhurried. Although Lu Lvxian did not show any signs of weakening, and even the sound of the zither was getting stronger and stronger. However, his heart was in turmoil. The sound of the flute continued to seep into his music, ignoring the might of his Renhuang and gradually invading his spirit. The blood in his body surged uncontrollably, becoming more and more violent. His spiritual soul actually felt like it was being suppressed. The young man who was fighting with him was clearly very skilled in sound techniques, and was not inferior to him. Clang! The sound of the zither was sonorous and heavy. Lu Lvxian plucked the strings with a pair of pale hands, and his finger techniques became extremely mysterious. At this moment, the sound of the zither in the void changed. The original hurricane-like attack suddenly changed its style and became vast and endless. The space seemed to be bound by the power of the Great Path. The binding force enveloped Su Jin, and the space was shrinking, crazily squeezing toward Su Jin. Guden could sense the change in the battle, and he frowned slightly. This old man was more difficult to deal with than he had imagined. Is this a cage of sound? Qin Hao stood below and could feel the will of both sides. At this moment, Guden was facing the same situation as when he was in Feng City, when he was trapped in midair by Lu Lvxian's music. He could not move, and the sound was turned into a cage. As the martial arts will of the opponent continued to deepen, the cage of sound would become stronger and stronger until it crushed him to death. At that time, Qin Hao's cultivation was in the Venerable Plane. He had been seriously injured and unleashed his spirit to break it open. Now, Gooden was at the peak of Renhuang. The sound of the flute of the great path rolled out majestically, like a vast ocean bombarding the void, surging in all directions. Everyone saw that Su Jin was wrapped in the dazzling light of Renhuang. Wisps of Renhuang's light wrapped around the sound of the flute, radiating out into the void. Bang, bang, bang. The sound of heavy punches reverberated, as if hammering on everyone's hearts, each blow more violent than the last. Finally, with a loud bang, the void seemed to collapse, and countless spatial faults appeared in the vision of all the cultivators. The vast power that shrouded the sky disintegrated. The cage of sound was broken by Su Jin. Palace Lord, and clenched her fists, and her heart beat violently. Even the Supreme Elder's ultimate technique of Lu Palace could not suppress the opponent? Lu Lv snorted heavily, and his fingers pulled the strings. Wisps of rule light were like wandering thunder and lightning, flashing above his fingers. Then, they continued to be injected into the strings, merging with the Guqin spirit. Rules entered the soul. He wanted to determine the winner with one blow from Su Jin. Swoosh! The sound of the flute lingered around Su Jin's body. Above Su Jin's body, the light of the rules of the Great Path also flickered. As expected, countless cultivators of the southern region were shocked. The young man with the flute, like the Supreme Elder of Lu Palace, had also comprehended the power of rules and was half a step into the imperial realm. No wonder no one could do anything to the other. Next, it would depend on whose rule will was stronger. The one with the stronger rule will win. Blue Dragon Fu Tian. Lu Lv spat out an incomparably majestic voice. Renhuang's vital qi surged, flashing with some mottled platinum luster. The luster was incomparably sacred and filled with extremely powerful power. At this moment, he was like an emperor sitting cross-legged in the void. Emperor's qi swept out in all directions, suppressing all things. Roar! The blue dragon roared, and an illusory dragon shadow flew out from the Guqin spirit. The huge dragon body swayed with the sound of the Guqin, overlooking the world, and the sound shook the 9 heavens. Lu Lv's will merged into the blue dragon. The huge dragon shadow was like the incarnation of his spiritual soul. The Emperor's will suppressed the void. Although it was not complete, it made many cultivators tremble in fear. They could not help but tremble, and a desire to worship rose. Dragon's might, the might of a true dragon condensed by will. This was the rule that the Supreme Elder of Lu Gong had comprehended. It was also his way of the true dragon. At this moment, the powerful dragon might suppress the square. The thousands of guests only felt the dragon's shadow invading their minds. Yulishin's will could directly affect their minds and devour their Tao hearts. No one dared to have any thoughts of resistance. This kind of rule will was extremely strong. It instantly affected the mind and weakened the opponent's will. Under the awe of the true dragon's might, they would give up resisting and be killed by the dragon's shadow. Thousands of people felt the dragon's might and trembled. One could imagine how strong the suppression of the will Su Jin, as Lu Lv's opponent, was. Incomparably bright light flowed around Su Jin's body. The dragon's might came crushing down. His flute music began to become unusually sharp, like an extremely sharp knife piercing through the air. Notes flew out from the holes of the flute one after another. They were densely packed and covered the sky. They lay across the void like mysterious ancient characters. These notes were integrated with Su Jin's rule will. They intertwined with each other and merged into a rule arrow. The arrow was bright and sharp, exuding an aura that could destroy heaven and earth. It sped toward the huge dragon shadow. The dragon's shadow roared. The dragon's might shook the great path. It opened its huge mouth and swallowed the rule arrow. At this moment, the rule light on Lu Lv's body was extremely strong. He wanted to refine the arrow and suppress Su Jin's rule power. Crack! The sound of bones shattering was heard. The people below saw that after the dragon's shadow in the void swallowed the arrow, a dazzling light ran through the dragon's body. It went all the way to the tail, piercing through the shadow. The dragon's bones exploded one after another. Even though it was condensed by will and rule power, the sound of bones shattering was so real. Then, the true dragon of the Jyotian collapsed. A mouthful of blood sprayed out of the Supreme Elder's mouth. His body, which was sitting cross-legged, trembled violently. An arrow appeared in his spiritual soul, as if it had pierced through his entire body, shattering his limbs and bones. At this moment, his face was extremely pale. The sound of the guqin under his palm suddenly stopped. The guqin's spirit dimmed, and the Emperor's qi on his body dissipated. He was like an old man who had run out of oil. His sitting posture was about to collapse. What rule power is this? An extremely weak sentence came out from Lu Lvxian's mouth. He raised his incomparably old face and looked at the young man in battle. Enter the soul, Su Jin replied calmly. The sound technique entered the soul and collapsed the spiritual soul. However, this old man's cultivation was extremely strong. Even if he had to bear 80% of Su Jin's rule power, he still managed to withstand it. Although his spiritual soul was damaged, there was no danger to his life. Su Jin didn't know how strong the warriors of the outside world were, but from the performance of this old man, he was not much weaker than the second-class disciples of the Divine Palace. Of course, the other party's age was obvious. He had cultivated for a long time, so his soul power was naturally very strong. Moreover, Su Jin did not use the supreme imperial methods of Yaoguang Peak. They had promised Senior Sister Muri that they would not use it so easily. The square quieted down. The battle had not been long, but it was so thrilling. Countless cultivators of the southern region looked up at Su Jin. What kind of peerless genius was this? Where did he learn from? He had defeated the Supreme Elder of the Music Palace. Many disciples of the Music Palace were silent. There was a strong pain spreading in their hearts. They could not imagine that the Supreme Elder had lost to a nobody. And this young man was not much older than them. What kind of cultivation was this? What kind of outstanding talent was this? Was he the favorite of the heavens? Perhaps even Showuk was not as dazzling as this person. Elder Meng was speechless. Su Jin had defeated Lu Lvxian so easily. The dragon's will was so strong that even he would be suppressed by the other party. However, the person Qin Hao said that he had trained had broken the rules of the Supreme Elder of the Music Palace. Today was really an eye-opener. The younger generation would surpass them in time. With such ability, Changhe Lo is not even a finger of yours. Even if the number one genius of the southern region, Showuk of the Sword Sect, was here, he would not be able to lift his head in front of you. Old man, to be able to meet someone like you in his lifetime, he has not lived in vain. Lu Lvxian sighed deeply. In an instant, he seemed to have aged incomparably. He looked up at the sky with difficulty, as if he wanted to see through the will of the heavens. Changhe Lo is not as bad as you say. Moreover, I am not Showuk's opponent. Su Jin replied sincerely. According to Changhe Lo's current realm, he was not weaker than Su Jin. If they fought, no one could say for sure who would win. However, Showuk was a sword emperor and was born with a rule. His rule power was different from the comprehension of acquired realm warriors. It was directly given by the heavens and was incomparably powerful. If he fought with Showuk, Su Jin would definitely lose. This was a fact. However, this had nothing to do with the Supreme Elder of the Music Palace. Moreover, after the other party asked, he did not seem to care how Su Jin answered. Lu Lvxian just looked at the sky quietly. It was as if in the endless void, there was a ray of light that he had been looking forward to for a long time. Crack! The terrifying light of calamity exploded in the void. Everyone was suddenly awakened. Thousands of people looked up at the same time. The Emperor's Tribulation. Lvxin had attracted the Emperor's tribulation. He was going to enter the Emperor's realm. Chapter 1559. In the battle between Renwang's, Yulushin's Tao was not as strong as Su Jin's. Perhaps he did not lose because of the Tao itself, but because his comprehension of the Tao was not as thorough as Su Jin's. Su Jin's Tao foundation was very deep, and the Tao was integrated into his soul, as if he was the Tao itself. The Supreme Elder of the Music Palace was defeated in the end. However, did everyone think that he would submit to fate and surrender to Qin Hao? Impossible. He had cultivated for 600 years and reached the peak of Renhuang, peeking into the Emperor's path. He could reach the Emperor's path in one step. If he reached the Emperor's path, who could stop him? The Music Palace would not decline in his hands. It would only prosper and shine endlessly. Boom. Crack. Everyone looked up and saw Yulushin still sitting there cross-legged. His face was pale, his aura weak, and his Guqin spirit dim. However, in the sky above his head, there was a terrible airflow that gradually gathered into a huge vortex. The vortex was like an awl rotating slowly. The light of catastrophe flashed inside, containing a supreme power. The vortex covered the top of Yulushin's head, covering the entire Music Palace. Even tens of thousands of miles away from the Music Palace, the people in countless cities could see it. It was like a dark cloud of doomsday, terrifying. When the Emperor's tribulation came, Yulushin's aura was still weak. However, there was also a trace of platinum light on his body, resonating with the tribulation clouds in the sky. Supreme Elder is going to break into the Emperor realm. Countless disciples of the Music Palace trembled in their hearts, and their joy could not hide their excitement. In the southern land there were 3 sovereigns and 4 sects at the top. Within each sect there were emperors who taught the way. Other than that, the other small sects would never be able to receive guidance from emperors, and could not see through the essence of the emperor's path. The Emperor realm was a barrier that blocked all the warriors of the small sects. It blocked their path of martial arts, and they could not cross it. How sad it was! Countless ancestors of the Music Palace were trying to break into the Emperor realm. Generation after generation, they advanced dauntlessly. Today, the Grand Supreme Elder had finally opened the Imperial door. From now on, the disciples of the Music Palace would be able to receive guidance from an Imperial realm cultivator, just like the disciples of other overlords. Their cultivation of sound would no longer be hindered. They had been waiting for this moment for a long time, ever since the creation of the Music Palace. The eyes of all the disciples turned red, including the elders and palace master and herself. They all shed tears as they looked at the supreme tribulation cloud. Unfortunately, breaking through to the martial emperor realm would forever be their extravagant hope. It could only exist in their fantasies. Entering the Emperor realm? If I let you enter, you can enter the Emperor realm. If I don't allow you to enter, you can't enter. Qin Hao's expression was ice-cold. As the sound of his voice faded, it was an unquestionable order. Dong. Su Jin stepped in the air, the light of laws on his body became even more intense. He broke through the air and went straight into the 9 heavens. He came below the tribulation clouds and stood between the 2 sides, blocking Ulvxin's head. At this moment, the light of rules on Su Jin's body was extremely dazzling, released to the limit. The sound of the flute connected with the heavens and the earth, seemingly resonating with the great path. What is he doing? He's using his physical body to block a martial emperor? Countless experts from the southern region were shocked. Elder Meng raised his head, and his breathing seemed to have stopped. The shock in his heart was indescribable. He looked at Su Jin in the middle of the sky. He wanted to use his mortal body to shake the heavenly path martial emperor tribulation and block Ulvxin from entering the martial emperor realm. It was simply too crazy. The martial emperor tribulation was extremely powerful. Many experts who tried to break through to the martial emperor realm were buried in it, dying with resentment. Even though Ulvxin had seen through the martial emperor realm, no one could say for sure that he would be able to enter the martial emperor realm. But at this time, there was someone who would bear the martial emperor tribulation for him. That's right, if Su Jin survived the martial emperor tribulation, he would indeed cut off Ulvxin's dream. But what if he couldn't? That would be death. Qin Hao, tell him to stop. Hurry up and stop, Elder Meng said anxiously after recovering from his shock. It was also his first time facing the martial emperor tribulation up close. Although many experts of the sword sect had succeeded in entering the martial emperor realm, they all left the sect on their own and found a place where no one was around. The martial emperor tribulation was too powerful. If they succeeded, they would naturally return to the sect. If they failed, they would never come back. This was also to prevent many people from being sad. Too many of Elder Meng's friends had disappeared from the southern region forever after seeing through the martial emperor realm. He knew that those old friends did not make it and died in the martial emperor tribulation. Today, it was also his first time seeing someone go through the martial emperor tribulation. The power above his head was too strong. Mortals simply could not resist. I can't stop, Qin Hao said. Why can't you stop? Elder Meng shouted. Such an outstanding junior, why should he sacrifice his life for Ulvxin? It was not worth it. If he continued to cultivate and improve his cultivation, Su Jin would definitely have a great chance to become a human emperor. But now, he was courting death by stopping the martial emperor tribulation. Rumble. An incomparably huge beam of light blasted out from the tribulation clouds in the sky, piercing straight towards Ulvxin. But Su Jin was standing between the two sides. He couldn't stop. He really couldn't stop. When the sound of the martial emperor tribulation rang out, Elder Meng's heart became extremely heavy. He looked at Qin Hao with some confusion. Why did he let Su Jin die? Was his hatred for Ulvxin so strong that he disregarded his friend's life? Qin Hao had changed. Qin Hao was not such a person in the past. If you want to stop my martial emperor tribulation, then die together. An explosive roar shook the heavens and earth. At this moment, Ulvxin raised his head. When he saw the martial emperor tribulation light blasted towards Su Jin's body, his eyes were bloodshot. The dim Guqin spirit suddenly glowed with the light of rules again. An azure dragon roared and flew out, soaring into the sky and attacking Su Jin. Chapter 1560. Ulixin watched the dragon fly toward Su Jin, his eyes full of intense hatred. He had cultivated for 600 years before attaining the imperial path. Now that the imperial tribulation was coming, he was about to step into the imperial realm, but he was stopped and his future was cut off. Since that was the case, let's die together. The real dragon soared into the sky, its murderous intent threatening. Seeing this scene, Elder Meng's heart was in his throat. The young man was facing the imperial tribulation and Ulixin's attack, and the situation was dangerous. Was Qin Hao not going to help? Even if Elder Meng wanted to intervene, Qin Hao didn't say anything, and he couldn't act on his own. That wouldn't be appropriate. But at this moment, Qin Hao still had no intention of helping, but there was a trace of worry and nervousness in his tense expression. Su Jin had not reached the imperial realm, and there was a certain risk in blocking the tribulation with his physical body. But as long as he could survive, he could refine his imperial body from the Great Path tribulation and become an imperial emperor with his physical body ahead of time. This was a test where risk and fortune coexisted. Ulixin could rob others of their treasures to fulfill his own path. Then Qin Hao would like to see if his imperial path was taken away by others. Would he feel pain and hate? Taking a step back, if Su Jin really couldn't hold on, Qin Hao would naturally help him resolve the crisis. In that case, he would also miss out on a fortune. At this time, countless people were looking at the sky. The Great Path Tribulation was descending, and the Supreme Elder of Music Palace was launching a crazy counterattack below. Could this young man hold on? The sound of the flute flowed in the void, and a bright halo swept out from Su Jin's position, covering the light of tribulation coming down from the sky. The halo seemed to be condensed by Su Jin's spiritual soul and was about to merge with the imperial tribulation of the Great Path. He didn't resist, and his whole body and mind were empty. Just like Qin Hao comprehending the divine soldier at Xiantian Peak, Su Jin let down all his guard, and the halo of his spiritual soul soared into the sky and merged with the light of tribulation of the Great Path. Rumble! The void seemed to collapse, and the might of the light of tribulation was like an unstoppable heavenly path, swallowing the halo all the way down and finally drowning Su Jin. At this moment, incomparably terrifying energy flickered above the heads of thousands of people. The sky shook, and the power was extremely terrifying. Everyone felt as if the world was about to be destroyed. At the same time, the azure dragon soared up and directly attacked the light of calamity. It was filled with hatred and wanted to destroy Su Jin, who was inside. However, when the azure dragon came into contact with the light of catastrophe, the former instantly vanished. Its power was too insignificant, and it was unable to contend with the might of the catastrophe of the Great Path at all. Pooh! Fresh blood filled with intense hatred sprayed out from the mouth of the Supreme Elder of Yugong. He had lost to Su Jin in the fierce battle before, and his spiritual soul had been injured by the rules. He was already exhausted, but he still launched a final attack at Su Jin. He was unwilling to accept this. He was too unwilling to accept this. However, after this attack, he could no longer hold on. His Guqin spirit immediately dissipated, and his aged body fell from the sky, smashing sadly into the birthday banquet. www.org. Contrast, Su Jin was undergoing the baptism of the Emperor's tribulation. In the light of calamity, the light of his rules became more and more dazzling. It was so sacred that no one dared to look up at him. He was like an emperor receiving the blessings of heaven. Even though when the first strike of calamity descended, Su Jin was blasted until he spat out a mouthful of blood, his body trembled, and his spiritual soul was about to collapse, he finally withstood it. There were 36 tribulations of the Great Path, each stronger than the last. The power of all 36 tribulations of the Great Path had been refined into his body and integrated with his own will. Everyone could clearly feel that the might of the great emperor in the light of calamity was getting stronger and stronger. This was a real emperor, not a fake one like Yugong Xin and Elder Meng. This guy. Feng Qianli looked on enviously. He really hoped that he was the one bathing in the emperor's tribulation. With the scripture of the way's spiritual waterfall washing the flesh and tempering the spiritual soul in the Xiantian karst cave, no matter which disciple of the divine palace it was, they were far stronger than the warriors of the outside world. The scripture of the way was right. The deeper the foundation, the stronger the will. The warriors who had been trained by the divine palace were all qualified to become emperors. Su Jin was a living example. Boom, boom, boom. In the sky, there were still terrible muffled sounds, but the flickering tribulation clouds were getting smaller and smaller until they completely disappeared from everyone's sight. It was as if the Emperor's tribulation had never appeared. But above the sky, there was a young man as majestic as an emperor. His body was glowing with a strong platinum luster, noble and oppressive. It's done. Everyone looked on in a daze, a little unable to believe their eyes. They had just witnessed a young man become an emperor. No, perhaps not a complete emperor, but this young man had been baptized by the emperor's tribulation and had cast a real emperor's body. If his state of mind was sublimated again, and saw through the mysteries of the emperor's path, he could become an emperor in an instant. Chapter 1561. Lin Shao had been killed, and the dantians of many of the sect's elders had been pierced by sword qi. They'd lost all of their cultivation and become crippled. At this moment, not a single disciple dared to take half a step forward. Even Ensui, the master of the music palace, could only grit his teeth and endure after witnessing the tragic death of his personal disciple. The music palace's grand elder had been defeated, and his path to emperor had been forcibly taken away. They were like fish on a chopping board, and Qin Hao was like a merciless knife on the chopping block. There was no room for negotiation. No matter how much they resisted, it was too pale and powerless. In your eyes, the weak don't deserve to have treasures or even dignity. The strong should dominate the weak and bully them at will. Is this your Dao? Qin Hao took a step forward, and the music palace Daofeng trembled. He roared at Yulvexin, "Answer me!" Yulvexin clenched his fists until they were pale, but his head was still lowered. Although his soul had been severely injured, his six senses were still clear. How could he not know that Lin Shao had been killed? That vicious swordsman had killed the heir that the music palace had painstakingly cultivated right in front of him. But at this moment, Yulvexin didn't have the courage to look up. Even though his heart was cut by a knife, there was nothing he could say. A beam of sword light shot across the field as Feng Qianli attacked again. His sword qi carried an insufferably domineering radiance as it headed straight for Palace Head, and Palace Head An's expression changed drastically, and his 8th-level Emperor Realm cultivation erupted with all his strength. Around him, the mortal Emperor's aura transformed into a turbulent storm of rhythm, attempting to stop the sword light. However, it was only one strike. The storm sadly shattered, and a line of blood spilled from Palace Head An's neck. His eyes widened, and his consciousness blurred until his soul was completely wiped out by the power of rules carried by the sword light. "Ensui, my son." The moment Palace Head An's body fell, Yulvexin, who'd been silent all this time, lowered his head and let out an extremely sorrowful cry. His disheveled white hair couldn't help but shake repeatedly. His voice was so sorrowful that every guest present could hear it. They couldn't help but feel a chill in their hearts, followed by endless sorrow. Ensui was Yulvexin's son. Rumor had it that this venerated elder of the music palace had spent his entire life immersed in sound arts, and devoted all his energy to cultivating the Emperor realm. That was his dream. That was why the rumors said that he had no Dao partner and had no children. Who would have known that Ensui was his son? Why, he sighed, Ensui, he sighed, Ensui, a person's struggle force. But for the sake of his ideals, he didn't even acknowledge his own son. Feng Qianli's eyes narrowed into slits. His long and cold gaze turned towards the remaining disciples of the music palace. His murderous intent was undisguised. Ulv's heart suddenly pounded violently. He stood up straight, and the blood-red light in his eyes almost seeped out. He looked at Feng Qianli, then retracted his gaze and looked directly at Qin Hao. He was clear that the person at the center of attention today was Qin Hao. Although Feng Qianli was vicious and merciless, he was at most an emotionless sword of slaughter. The one controlling this sword was Qin Hao. I lost, but I didn't lose to you. You used 3 human-shaped weapons to bully my music palace. You, Qin Hao, don't deserve to be called a hero. If you really had the ability, you should be the one fighting with me. Yulvexin mocked. It was never too late for a man to take revenge. If Qin Hao wanted to wash away the hatred of 3 years ago, he would have destroyed the music palace with his own hands. Unfortunately, he didn't deserve it today. Qin Hao didn't say anything. He knew better than Yulvexin whether he deserved it or not. Isn't it just one life? Old man, why should I be afraid of death? I was the only one who attacked you back then, and it had nothing to do with the disciples of my sect. I'll give you my life, but I hope you'll let the disciples of my sect live. Grand Elder. The disciples of the Music Palace stepped forward in tears. Ha 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 ha, old man, in this life, I'm worthy of the foundation of the Music Palace, worthy of the thousands of disciples of the southern mountain range. It's just a pity that, in this life, I can't taste the glory of the Emperor's light. Bang, a heavy blow. With the laughter rolling in the birthday banquet, Ulvexen raised his palm and smashed the top of his head. Blood covered his body, and he died under his own palm. The power of the rules raged, scattering his soul. A generation of Music Palace powerhouses died with regret. It was sad, but there was a trace of admiration in people's hearts. In order to protect his disciples, he was willing to kill. As he said, he was worthy of the sect, worthy of the thousands of disciples of his sect. But you are worthy of the thousands of souls of the Wan Cultivator Alliance, and the countless people of Feng City who were separated from their families. Killing you is not enough to vent the hatred of those whose homes were destroyed. Qin Hao's eyes were red. A life for a life, this was the truth since ancient times. Ulvexen couldn't live today no matter what, so what if he didn't kill himself? A damned life in exchange for the safety of the sect's disciples seemed quite noble. However, this life was owed to him in the first place. A trace of soul power wandered around his body. Qin Hao's eyes were a little scary as he looked at the disciples of Music Palace gathered together in the square. This gaze made countless disciples tremble. As long as Qin Hao gave the order, in an instant, they would all die without a burial place. What's wrong? You want to cut the weeds and eliminate the roots? Ha, do it. Anyway, we don't believe in your promise. Who will believe that you won't kill us? We are not afraid of death. Come on. When I was in Golden Light City, I witnessed the battle between you and Changhalo. It was so dazzling. Even though you came from a foreign region and were despised and questioned by many seniors of the southern region, in my heart, I secretly admired you. You are indeed worthy of the title of Heaven's Pride. But today, you are just a narrow-minded and vicious villain. Bah! A female disciple of Music Palace spat at Qin Hao. Back then, she really admired Qin Hao. For a moment, she was in a daze, secretly admiring him. He was an outstanding talent of the same generation, neither servile nor overbearing. How could he not be worthy of respect? But today she was too disappointed. Narrow-minded? If I was narrow-minded, you wouldn't have the chance to stand here and talk nonsense to me. Qin Hao restrained himself. Terrifying black lines of evil energy climbed up his face and gradually retracted into his skin. He took a deep breath, finally suppressing the impulse to slaughter all the disciples of Music Palace. He said coldly, "Do you hate me? Your feelings now are the same as when I was bullied by you, Luxin. If one day you step into the Emperor realm and have enough power, you can also seek revenge on me. I welcome you at any time, but I am afraid you don't have the ability." Qin Hao glanced at the Celestial Palace. When his gaze landed on it, there was no need for him to say anything. A powerful punch tore through the air. In an instant, the square was filled with the power of thunder. The Thunder Dragon completely destroyed the majestic Celestial Palace. The fist of thunder penetrated the entire peak of the way, destroying its foundation. Countless boulders began to roll down. The main peak of the Music Palace was about to collapse. After today, there will be no more Music Palace in the southern region. If there is one, Yu Luxin will be the best outcome. Humph! Qin Hao slowly rose into the air. A turbulent divine fire of the Great Path wrapped around his body. Within the fire, the terrible light of starry rules flickered. He turned and flew into the distance, disappearing from everyone's sight. However, the remaining flame aura allowed everyone present to clearly sense the existence of the Emperor's might. That Emperor's might was even stronger than that of Yu Luxin, who had seen through the emperor's path. It was as if Qin Hao had become a true emperor. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Several streams of light followed Qin Hao. Su Jin, the Thunder Dragon, and Feng Qianli all disappeared. Elder Meng glanced at Yu Luxin's body and sensed that the peak of Music Palace was about to collapse.